Hey guys, welcome to Politically Provoked, an interactive podcast where we host debates, panels, and interviews. If this is your first time joining us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell to keep up to date with all our future debates and panels. We are primarily on YouTube, but you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Discord, BitChute, TikTok, and Instagram. All the information is in the banner below. We also have a link tree you can find in the description, or you can just search Politically Provoked and we should pop right up. Politically Provoked is a neutral ground where people from across the political spectrum can either duke it out in a debate or just have a casual discussion in one of our panels. Either way, we try to represent both left and right-wing views on every episode. I'm your left-wing host, Brittany. This is your right-wing host, Todd. How are you, Todd?
Doing good, Britt. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Okay, so tonight is panel night. We have a very fun panel for you guys. We're going to first start off by talking about the events of the week. So I think we'll talk about SCOTUS taking up the abortion case and the ceasefire in Israel, and maybe what the Chicago mayor said. We'll see how much time we have. But let's bring on our guests. So let's start off with Alex. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great, Brittany. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Yeah. So if you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
So my name is Alex. I am a registered independent, have been a registered independent for over 15 years. However, in the last election, I did vote for President Biden. You can find me on YouTube and Spotify and Audible. I do a podcast, even though I haven't recorded an episode in quite some time. I do the podcast of The Perspective, where the truth has no bias, which is a social issues-driven podcast. But my YouTube channel, I really haven't done a whole lot on it recently, so hopefully I'm going to start getting back into that here eventually. So.
Great. And all of our guests, we do have where you can find them in the description. So if you guys want to check them out, you can go find that there. So next up, let's bring on Alex's friend, Justin. How are you tonight, Justin?
Hey, Brittany. How are you?
Doing good. So same question. If you want to introduce yourself and tell people where you lie on the political spectrum.
My name is Justin, and I'm a conservative Republican, a Trump supporter, but consider myself more or less a Reagan Republican, going back that far, if people can even remember him now. I did not vote for President Biden. Alex, what a disgrace! Oh my goodness!
What a disgrace!
I own it.
I know. So, all right, looking forward to the panel.
All right. So next up, let's bring on a nihilist. How are you tonight?
I am doing okay.
Okay. All right. So if you want to introduce yourself and tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
Hello, I am a nihilist. I am more or less of a dirtbag leftist type of YouTuber. My channel is a nihilist. And I make content of ever deteriorating quality.
All right. Thank you. All right. So next up, this is his first time joining us for our panel. So let's bring on DeAndre. How are you tonight?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So same questions. If you want to introduce yourself, tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and where people can find you.
Well, on the political spectrum, I'm a constitutionalist, registered to the Constitution Party. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not a Republican, though I do vote Republican, since there are very few constitutionalists that are actually available to vote for. I did not vote for Biden. I think that's a stupid decision for anybody to vote for. But you can find me on Spotify, Radio Public, Breaker Audio, Google Podcasts. I do a podcast called The Story of America with DeAndre Pace. Just posted a couple of episodes a few days ago. And I still have my other websites that are not up and available yet, but once those get available, the hyperlink will be clickable.
All right, great. All right, so like I said, we're going to talk about the week's events, and then our main topic is going to be whether or not the parties have switched places. So we'll do that at the end, but we might as well jump right in, and we can talk about the ceasefire in Israel. So I guess I'm going to read this off. It says, after 11 days of fighting, Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire. At least 243 people, including more than 100 women and children, were killed in Gaza, according to its health ministry. Israel said that it's killed at least 225 militants during the fighting. Hamas has not given casualty figures for their fighters. In Israel, 12 people, including 2 children were killed, its medical service says. All right. So, and then it says both sides have claimed victory. So I don't know how much you guys have been following this stuff. I know, Annihilus, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about what's going on in Israel. So if you want to maybe get us started on this.
I mean, now that the ceasefire has happened, there's much less to talk about, I suppose. But I hope we can all agree that the ceasefire is a good thing. I don't generally like it when people die.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's a good thing to not like it when people die. Do you guys have strong opinions on this? Any of you? Because we can.
So I am pro-Israel, but I don't like Benjamin Netanyahu. I do support the people of Palestine, but I don't support Hamas. Let's put it that way, because I've known that there are people. The people don't want war, really. They don't want this conflict to continue. However, they're all just caught in the middle, just like everybody else right here. I really don't support Benjamin Netanyahu because I feel like he wants to continue this conflict because he knows he's going to continue to get support from us. But Hamas is all about ideology to them. And of course, they're not going to report how many casualties they have because it's going to fit their image better, because they know that if they report any casualties on their side, that's an automatic win for Israel right there. That's the thing that people need to understand about this. Now, war is a terrible thing. This is some things that people need to understand. War is a terrible thing. Atrocities are going to happen whether it's on one side or the other. And I don't condone when, for example, if there's like a bombing that takes place, like where men, women, and children who happen to be innocent bystanders, die. That's just part of collateral damage. And again, I'm not saying that's okay, but that's just kind of how war happens right there. And I know, for example, Israel is going to be looked at as the bad guy because they've got our backing. We contribute a lot of funding into Israel. However, we also contribute funding into Palestine. However, we contribute a lot to Israel's Iron Shield, which they use to deflect a lot of these rockets right here. Now, if you were to have the same kind of funding for Palestine, where they were actually able to deflect the same amount of rockets going to their region, the casualty rate and the kill rate probably wouldn't be as high necessarily. But once again, I just think that, the situation right here is very tense right here. And will we ever see a two-state solution here? Probably not, because this is specifically about ideology and who has the most land right here. But the people that are caught in the middle are the civilians that have really no part in this war right now. So that's my part.
Right. Well, and I know both you and Justin were in the military. Alex, you're still in the military, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Justin, are you? You're not, are you?
Nope, I am out.
Do you have any strong feelings on what's been going on over there, or?
Sure. I think the solution is Israel should annex the Gaza Strip and expel the Palestinians out of the territory. I mean, how long do you live next door to an enemy for that takes hundreds of millions of dollars in aid, digs tunnels underneath it to kill Israeli civilians and soldiers,
Do you have
and
any
fires
evidence of
rockets?
that? Do you have any evidence that has actually happened?
Well, they just fired 4,000 rockets. So where did they get the money from?
So you're pivoting from already pivoting from the tunnels, because there's no evidence any civilians have been hurt by those tunnels.
I'm not. Well, of course not. The civilians aren't hurt by the tunnels. That's where the jihadists are hiding, but they're digging tunnels. So I think the answer is to Israel should just simply annex the land and send the Palestinians somewhere else.
Oh, somewhere else. Okay.
Alice has strong opinions on it, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, I don't even. Yeah, don't blow up the Christian stuff, please. That's all I'm asking.
I have very strong opinions on this. I know people I've seen they do. DeAndre, do you have anything on this one?
I'm not particularly interested in what happens over there. I think that Israel and Palestine. I don't believe Palestine exists. They're not a real nation. But I'm a believer of take care of the homeland before you start taking care of other people. So let Israel fight their own battle. And I would say harsher language, but this is a family-friendly show.
Is it though? But
can I just say, Palestine may not be a nation that actually exists, but there is no such thing as a nation that exists. All nations are just constructs that we create in our mind. So it's not really an argument right there. I care about the people.
constructs created in our mind, but also on maps, and Palestine doesn't exist.
Oh yeah,
and it hasn't.
so Palestine doesn't exist on a map. Therefore, it's okay to displace the 2 million people living on that Gaza Strip because you want those people to have a certain ethnicity instead. That seems kind of like the definition of genocide.
I didn't say kill them. I said relocate them.
Oh yeah, so you're just gonna force them out of their home. That actually is genocide. You don't have to actually kill people for that to be considered genocide.
Sort of the definition of the word, actually.
Right.
I wouldn't say necessarily that it's about certain constructs. Historically speaking, Palestine has never existed. Over the last 6,000 years that entire region has been in existence, Palestine has never existed. Even when
why didn't it exist?
Oh,
perhaps
because they never existed.
Because people didn't recognize that they existed. But that's the only reason why. I don't care about the nation. I don't care about the nation. I care about the people living there. And
the
just
people
so
living there have the entirety of the Middle East to live in.
Oh yeah, so those homes that they've lived in for generations, well, you can just force them out. They have somewhere else to go. That's like the apologism we used for the Native Americans. Oh yeah, they're all just Native Americans, right? They're all the same. You can just push them farther west over and over and over. All right.
Well, don't you think a two-state solution could be a problem with, or like a solution they can kind of come up with where they can kind of coexist peacefully? Don't you think?
I hope so, but there's no evidence. So. There's no evidence Israel is moving toward a two-state solution. It seems to be a ruse where they just use that and then they dance around it, and then every so often they provoke another war and annex new territory.
Well, who's poking directly, actually? Because it's kind of like both sides are poking at each other equally. Like I said, Benjamin. Well, yeah, because Hamas isn't exactly stellar right now. In my opinion.
Do you think Hamas has equal power to Israel?
Not equal power to Israel, but they have influence in Palestine, do they not?
Yes, they do, but it has they are nowhere near as powerful as Israel. So you're
there's
not be equating those two as if they're like equal combatants in this.
Here's the reason why you can't, because I look at Hamas like I would at ISIS, like I would at the Taliban. They are a terrorist organization. They use ideology to basically push people to do their own bidding. They've used children to do suicide bombings, actually. I mean, and again, remember, it's not because I'm pro Hamas. I am actually just pro-Palestine, the people of Palestine, not Hamas, because Hamas doesn't speak for all the people of Palestine, just like Benjamin Netanyahu, either he might be, the president or whatever of Israel. He doesn't, because there are people in Israel that don't want this fight to continue because they've lost relatives in this war right here. That's my entire point, though.
Okay, so my point is, and just to clarify, I don't like Hamas. My point is that Israel has the overwhelming power in this area, right? They're the ones with nukes. They're the ones with all that funding from America and all those weapons. What's that background noise?
Sorry, that's my garage. I'm going to mute.
Okay, so Israel has all the power here. So if Israel really wanted to create a two-state solution, they could do it just like that, just by snapping their fingers. And since Hamas is the weaker party by far here, they would be forced to agree to even very bad terms because, well, if this conflict goes on for too much longer, eventually Palestine's just going to get swallowed up by Israel. So
why
in this case, it is the responsibility of the more powerful party to reach out and begin negotiations. But there's a reason why they don't.
I think that's a very ludicrous position to put in because, number one, a two-state solution cannot exist if the two parties willing, regardless of whether one has more power over the other one. They can't exist if the two cannot co-mutually agree that this belongs to so-and-so, and this how this is, and they both agree and to stop any type of escalations of violence between the two. Between these two, and particularly because it is mostly religious between these two, being that the land Jerusalem and for Muhammad is what the Palestinians are always fighting over. It's unless the two can agree that with Gaza Strip, make that Palestine, the rest of it leave that as Israel, and then sort of do a general election the way we sort of do in America, where we all have our own different states. Here, we all have different state rules and state regulation. That's the only way it will ever work. It would not work if you just went in there and just invaded them and told them bow down or not. I mean, that we tried that in the South during the 1800s, 1850s, and they seceded from the Union and destroyed the entirety of the United States.
Well, the only reason why that's a problem is because, like, Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm willing to bet, because in the last 2 elections he's had, he came from behind by some miracle within 24 hours and won the election, which is very suspect. It's kind of like Ahmadinejad from Iran. So that's one problem right there, because I feel like because he knows he's going to get the money from the United States, he's going to continue this solution right here. And yes, he's going to continue to come on here and say, well, he is the good guy here, which I tend to disagree with him on. But then you've got Hamas over there. Hamas is going to rule based upon fear. They might be the response to Israel, but considering the fact that the tactics that they use, where they are firing from buildings that are not necessarily supposed to be structures you're supposed to fire from, but I don't expect Hamas to abide by the rule of law or the law of warfare. That's the problem right there. And this is where things kind of get a little clouded up right here when it comes down to talking about war, though.
All right. So, and what I might do also, if you guys have a little comments, or I might pull them up as we go for this, but I think we're not going to spend too much more time on this topic because we do have a lot of other stuff to talk about. But do Big Papa's fascist question. It says, what about a no state solution? Should Christians annex Israel? And then he said, for the good of everybody. I don't really know what he means by that, but
so Christians coming in and invading to make things better. I don't know
like
if
Crusades.
you followed the Middle East, but that doesn't tend to go well.
I would only consider a two-state. I would only consider a two-state solution in Palestine when Turkey gives back Istanbul to the Christians. I mean, that was a Christian capital of Eastern Europe, and that's never come up before. So why don't the Muslims give that city back? If we're going to talk about history.
But so this has nothing to do with Palestine. And also, are you talking about like the Crusades or something like that? That was quite a while ago. I'm pretty sure before international law even existed.
I mean, we're talking world history, the Palestinians and whatnot, going back to the biblical years. So yeah, the Crusades were 1,000 years ago, but we could argue everything. Every city that was taken by one side or the other.
Exactly, especially if you go back in history, when the Persian Empire conquered most of the Western world at that time. Not obviously excluding the Americas, but most of the Western world was conquered by the Persian Empire, which was majority Arab. So they did conquer a lot of territory, but at the same time, you had Constantine conquered a lot of territory too. So it's very subjective given the amount of time that has gone over through all of those things. I don't see it as a solution. I agree with Alex about Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is a problem. I am an advocate for Israel, but I do think Netanyahu is a problem because you cannot abridge peace by constantly being in an aggressive stance.
Yeah, and what do you have to understand? You can go first. I spoke
to make a quick correction, though, Persian and Arab is actually two predominantly different, people actually, and that's like the only first thing. When we're talking about the Crusades, though. However, the Crusades, like when the Turks actually invaded, they had spread all the way out to Spain, and the Crusades was a response to all that aggression right there. So when it comes down to answering the question, should the Christians invade? You want to have three Abrahamic religions fighting over one piece of territory. That's asking for some seriously nasty business right there, because two Abrahamic religions fighting over one piece of real estate is bad. Three Abrahamic religions is just going to get really nasty, because you think the Israelis are just going to roll over and just accept everything we say just because? I don't think so, honestly. That's just ask for trouble.
All right, so let's kind of move on to the next topic, and if we want, we can touch back on this, but we do have a lot of other stuff to talk about. So let's go on to the Supreme Court. Also, okay, so Facebook user, you need to sign in above to StreamYard. So we have permission to see who you are. Otherwise, we just see Facebook user. It's lame. Okay. So, all right. So the Supreme Court has decided to take up an abortion case, I guess, from Mississippi. And let me see what I had something that they had said. Where is it? Hold on. Let me find it. Should have had this ready. Okay, so the case Dobbs versus Jackson's Women Health organization is an appeal from Mississippi to keep its ban on abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy, which was struck down by a federal district court in Mississippi in 2018 and upheld a year later by the New Orleans-based U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. In announcing they would take this case, the Supreme Court justices said they would only review one of 3 questions presented to them, whether all... God, what the fuck is going on in here? Somebody's like, oh, I swear to God. I'm gonna
you want me to take over for you?
Yeah, you know what? Let me just... Okay, well, let's just get into the abortion case. I'm gonna have to go tell them to stop. So go ahead.
It basically was at 15 weeks abortions, and I don't know how you can't figure it out before, like, why you would need to even go further. I am 100% pro-life, so I don't like it, but I don't even understand what the problem is, why that would even be an issue. Like, you should be able to figure it out in 15 weeks, but anyway, we'll pass it around. Let's go with DeAndre next, and then to Alex, and then to Justin, then to Nihilist.
Well, speaking as a Mississippian, which I didn't realize this case came from Mississippi. I didn't do too much research on it, but I'm in total agreement with Todd on this. Abortion, as Roe v. Wade were to say it way back when it was actually decided, was supposed to be safe, rare, and legal. I don't believe in using abortion as retroactive birth control. I think that's besides the point, especially considering the fact that if you have to get to the point where you're having an abortion, when there are a myriad of other birth control methods that you can use to prevent even getting pregnant in the first place, which is a whole different discussion in itself as to why we are so willing to have frivolous and unprotected sex and just procreate out there. And of course, people tend to point the finger to men and be like, well, they should be wrapping it up, which I agree, but men can't get pregnant. Therefore, they can't assume the risk of pregnancy. So the burden of it falls down to the potential mother. And any methods that she can use that can prevent that, especially considering that she controls whether or not a guy can enter into her body, whether the guy can ejaculate into her body with or without protection, what protection she's using, and other different types of things. As far as I'm concerned, abortions should be used in the most rare of circumstances. Obviously, there are certain exceptions, but to save one life or risk another one, I think that's where it needs to come down to. The abuse of it is overblown, particularly down here in the South now.
So what did I miss?
Okay, go ahead, Alex. We're going to go Alex, Justin, Nihilist, then finish up, Britt.
So, as somebody that is pro-choice, I put it to you like this, okay? When it comes down to abortion, everybody can agree that, abortion is a decision that is usually left up to the mother that has to make this decision right here, okay? Now, I'm not really we can go into the weeds a little bit as far as like whether the father is a say-so or not, but at the end of the day, you have to take this into consideration. It's the mother that usually is the one that makes this decision right here, okay? And while most people say this isn't exactly ideal, we have to remember something. Abortion is a medical procedure right here. This is something that a woman that has to talk to a, certified doctor to handle this procedure right here, okay? Now, anybody can come out here and say, well, here's my opinion about this, like I do all the time. However, whenever a woman actually comes out and says why she's getting abortion, at the end of the day, it's none of our business right here, because we don't know her story. We don't know her situation. We don't know her scenario. We don't know what she's going through at this time. Now, it's everybody that can just say, oh, well, these guys, this lady should have thought about that beforehand. Well, do you know her story? Did you take the time to understand what her story is right here? So anytime people try to make the situation talking about how, well, abortion shouldn't be legal across the board, or we shouldn't allow something like this to happen, what they fail to understand are anytime you make something illegal, right, it doesn't mean that it's just going to suddenly go away. Real quick story. My mother talked about when she was in college. This is before Roe v. Wade. There was a woman that was raped, okay? She was raped, and she did not want to keep the child. And before Roe v. Wade, before there was actual doctors to actually help her through the procedure, she had to have one of those back alley abortions. And it got to the point because this person was, out of sync with the medical world right here and didn't have like really good practices. It made it to where she could not have children anymore. This is a very real thing right here. Now, we can make the same argument about as firearms. You can restrict firearms. That doesn't stop criminals from doing it. And I'm not saying the woman that is having the abortion is a criminal, but the principle is all the same across the board. Just because you restrict it or try to say, well, you shouldn't do this because of A, B, and C right here, it doesn't mean that they're just going to stop. It just means that people that have more money and more influence are going to get these abortions. But meanwhile, the impoverished and the people with lower income families are not going to be able to afford to be able to, they're going to end up getting these back alley abortions, which puts them at much higher risk right here. There's a lot of extenuating circumstances as to why a woman might have an abortion that we need to take into consideration. But again, at the end of the day, it's none of our business.
Right. Okay. And let's when we talk, let's try to keep it like under 2 minutes so everybody kind of has a chance. So when we go around, I don't know, Todd, if you want to kind of keep an eye.
Yeah, I think. I will. Yep.
All right. So who was going next?
That would be me. So
I think your abortion, Justin.
Yeah. So I think Roe versus Wade was a terrible case, incorrectly decided, but this Supreme Court case will not address that. It may uphold the abortion ban in Mississippi, that after 15 weeks you cannot have an abortion, and then some other states will follow suit. I'm a firm believer that abortion, social issues are decided at the state level. And you could have some states like New York and California that would legalize it, up until the baby's coming out, and other states will follow, different procedures. I don't think it should be a form of birth control, but I do separate from my more conservative brethren, where I think rape, incest, and mother's life should be acceptable for abortions, but using it as birth control, I disagree with completely. Except I do support abortions for liberals up until like the 75th trimester. So the southern states can pass those.
Oh.
Yep, tactical abortions. I like it. So that's my overall opinion. Horrible. Social issues, in my opinion, constitutionally are always resolved on the state level. When the federal government, most issues, we could debate everything from gay marriage to that should be solved on.
I think a lot of that's going to be a good segue into what our actual main topic is, because that is definitely not true.
What about like Civil Rights Act? Would that have been decided state by state?
Could you imagine?
Yes, I do.
You
I
think the
firmly
South
believe.
should be?
Wait. Annihilus, go in.
Okay, so I take a very funny position, very different from all of you. I am neither pro-choice or pro-life. I am anti-both. I think abortion is an active good because, well, let's consider the human rights of the unborn child. Let's say nobody asked to be born. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to be given this shitty life of mine, and nobody else should either. So if you're really gonna bring a child into this shitty world of ours, we might as well at least have to guarantee them a good life of some sort. So if somebody's mother doesn't want to raise a child, it's probably for the best that we go ahead and do the abortion. So obviously taking this Supreme Court case on with 6 conservatives, I guess it's 5.5.
What do you
by
what do you guys
now.
think's going to happen?
Oh, I think Roe
that's
v.
an
Wade
incredibly
could get
Okay, one at a
overturned.
time. Wait, go DeAndre, then Nihilist, and then Justin, and Alex. What do you think the ruling's going to be?
I have to say, the nihilist, you made me laugh. That's an incredibly morbid way of putting it, but not inherently wrong. I can't say it's wrong, but I will say I don't particularly think anything is going to happen as far as Roe v. Wade. I mean, when Kavanaugh was confirmed, he essentially said he wasn't touching Roe v. Wade. He said that it's already practically been decided, and I don't think Justice Amy Coney Barrett is going to touch it. The only one that I think would have any real things would be probably Clarence Thomas, but Clarence Thomas is, and what's the other guy's name?
Samuel Alito.
Alito. Clarence Thomas and Alito, they have been talking about it for a long time.
Amy Coney Barrett doing it.
But I just don't see them having enough support to even bring up the issue. And then again, you would have to actually have a case brought up against Roe v. Wade, and not particularly just this case where we're doing the Mississippi 15-week abortion ban. You'd have to have an actual case that's been litigated against that from a different state or a group of states, and have that be brought up there. And I just don't see that happening. I think the favor would probably wind up being a 5-4 vote in favor.
But they're not actually. They don't have to overturn Roe v. Wade for all this. They can just suffocate it to the point that you don't have to overturn it, and they get around that. Seems like a fun little loophole for them. But Justin, what do you think the freaking results are going to be?
I think it's going to be a 6-3 decision upholding the ban. I really think the conservatives will vote as a block to say that that's the correct thing to do. Maybe one of the new justices moves, maybe a Kavanaugh, but I don't think so. I think they're going to vote as a block on this one. Even Roberts will join in.
No way. I don't think that.
I like how by this point we think of Roberts as like a liberal justice.
He had to become the swing vote. He's not a liberal. He had to become the swing vote because he's trying to protect the actual court. He's trying to protect the institution, and he's doing that over his own ideological views. So I wouldn't call him a liberal because he was somebody who voted against a lot of liberal stuff. But once it became time where he was the only swing vote left and he had to protect the institution, he just stepped up.
Oh, he wasn't protecting the institution back then, but when he votes in favor,
because he wasn't the swing vote. He wasn't the swing vote back then. He wasn't the swing vote back then.
I'll take.
Okay. And Alice, what do you think?
I mean, I don't really like to speculate too much on what's going to happen. I think the conservatives are just gonna they have the numbers, right? But as to how bad their decision was going to be, I don't know.
Okay, Alex.
Honestly, when it comes down to the Supreme Court, I really have no idea what's going to happen. It could go either which way because we all know that, the last president was banking on the Supreme Court to back him up, but they obviously didn't come through, which was kind of a surprise. So at the end of the day, the conservative base is going to say, we need to protect the life of the child until that child dies in a school shooting. Then who fucking cares, right? So let's put it that way. So we'll just say, oh, who cares?
All right. So
whoever had 934 for Alex's first reference to Trump on the poll, I'll Venmo the money when we're done.
I didn't mention the name though. I just said the last president.
Yeah, I know. We do not speak his name here.
Mm-hmm.
You shall not be named.
I'll probably mention tons. I don't care.
I'm surprised he beat you to it.
Yeah, me too. Well, I did have to go yell at my dad, so that kind of took some time from my Trump hating. But all right, so let's just get into our topic. I mean, well, okay. So there was. I don't know if you guys heard about what the Chicago mayor said. Have you guys heard about it?
No, go ahead.
I did.
Right.
I heard
the one.
I think it's kind of a good segue into our topic. But basically, the Chicago mayor had said for her 2-year anniversary of being mayor that she was not going to do any interviews with white journalists, only Black journalists. And so she's getting a lot of heat for that because
As well, she should.
Because they're calling her racist. And so I don't know. I mean, I just found out about this today, seeing all the Tucker Carlson, I'm sure he went off on her. But I think somebody had mentioned that this just proves that it was always the Democrats all along that were racist. But does that, I mean, does that really, is that the same as saying, okay, that she's not going to do any interviews with anybody that's not Black, because she did mention that there are not enough Black journalists, I guess either following her or something. I definitely don't think that's the same as the Democrats were always the racist party. Like, so I don't know. I want to hear from the conservatives first on this topic because, So let's go with DeAndre first.
On the topic of the mayor, or on the topic of
let's go into our main topic. I mean, you can throw that in a little bit too. I don't want to spend too much time on it.
In the main topic, I would say if you go back, I mean, it's very easy to take a look at the party that has sponsored racism in the country for the longest period of time. Down here in the South, people are always like, "Oh, the parties have flipped. The parties have flipped." Well, I always question people, when do you think that the parties actually flipped? And what year would that have happened? What Congress would that have happened in? As far as I can find, going back to the voter record all the way from the 1880s, the South has voted Democrat, except in the case of the Senate, from the 91st Congress all the way until the 101st Congress. The actual matter of fact, from Mississippi, the first time that I can find that they actually voted a Republican Senate was in 1989. The first time that Texas actually flipped to Republican was 2003. The first time that Alabama was in 97. The first time that the entire South as a whole voted Republican was in 2014 and 2016. You go back and you take a look at the voter record. Mississippi has been Democrat for the majority of my life, and before then. Just recently, during the Trump election, was the first time that Mississippi actually voted Republican as a House in my entire life of living here. So when we're talking about the parties flipping, it's important to just take a look at the history. It's right there. I mean, you go back to the 91st Congress, and I went back there because in 1969, obviously, this is when Lyndon Johnson was the president after the Civil Rights Act was passed, and that's when you had virtually zero votes from Democrats to actually pass the Civil Rights Act in 68. And then in the entirety of the South, you had only West Virginia was Republican in the 91st Congress in 69. All the other ones were either perfectly split or Democrat. As a matter of fact, the tally was Florida was a purple state, Georgia was Democrat, Alabama Democrat, Mississippi Democrat, Louisiana Democrat, Missouri Democrat, Indiana Democrat, South Carolina was purple, North Carolina was Democrat, Tennessee purple, Virginia Democrat, Pennsylvania Democrat, Texas Democrat, Oklahoma was purple, New Mexico was purple, and West Virginia, as I said before, being the Republican state. And it was that way up until 1997, which was the first time that 6 or more Southern states had actually voted in favor of a majority Senate Republican. And the first time that 6 or more states actually had a majority of the House of their states, because I went by the Senate race and the gubernatorial race on the Congress, on the party of control for Congress. And the first time that many of these southern states actually had the House switch over to Republican in the South was long after the Senate changed. For instance, Mississippi, we've had a Republican Senate practically my entire life. But our House in Mississippi has been Democrat my entire life up until Trump's presidency. So when you're talking about these types of things, I mean, the record's right there. You can see that if there was a flip, I cannot see when it happened, because the voter record has remained the same for more than my lifetime, more than my grandmother's been alive, actually.
Wait, so your argument is because you can't find a single point in time where all the parties flipped, therefore they didn't flip? Because it sounds like to me you described a slow process of the parties gradually switching and then use that as evidence that they didn't switch at all.
That's not what I said at all. What I'm saying is, if you take a look at the voter record, the parties in the South, they did not vote Republican as a whole until Donald Trump was elected. In Mississippi, as of right now, we're still a Democrat House-run state. We're still run by Democrats on a House level. Most of our courts are still run by Democrats. Most of our local officials are still run by Democrats, and that's the same for the majority of the South. It's been that way for decades. And if there was a flip, you will be able to see a correlation throughout the course of history, especially considering the fact that most people tend to cite the 1960s as a time in which the parties sort of flipped, because they coined the Civil Rights Act and they coined the assassination of Martin Luther King and JFK as the flipping point with the so-called Dixiecrats. But the evidence and the correlation between the voter record just proves that it's not so, especially considering when you take a look at in 89 and then 72, where you have James Eastland, who Mississippi Democrat senator, was the head of the Judiciary Committee of the Senate during that particular time. He finally got voted out in 89, well, during that Senate race.
Okay.
It's just right there, the record.
Really quick, I just want to, because I've had this on the screen for a while. It shows the South, all the southern states, and it shows, you know, as you can see them as they are starting to change. Like, of course, it's not going to be an instant flip. Like, it's a gradual change, and you'll notice it happens right around, like, anytime there's a civil rights stuff going on. That's what ends up changing. That's what ends up making people fucking change parties. And it's not the politicians that have changed; it's the voters. Like, politicians come and go.
Say that. Looking at that one, I looked at that chart as well. That chart is based upon the presidential race, which of course you would have to have that correlation, because it was entirely the Republicans that had the Civil Rights Act passed. There were
more Democrats that voted for it, actually than Republicans.
There were not.
Absolutely, there were.
Not a higher percentage.
Exactly. Though. Yeah, exactly. There were, but you're playing with things like that. There were a lot more Democrats in office in general. But if you're going to play,
of course they had more votes.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, when you say it like that, like, okay, they weren't voting like a monolith the way they do now.
Let me break down the real number.
It was 80% to 64%.
Okay, right. Okay, so we're going to talk about it. Of the 171 Republicans in the House and 64, 136 of them voted for it. That means they voted for it. I already have it.
Which
I just gave you all the fucking states.
We know which states. The same states.
God, you're so difficult. Listen to what I'm saying. Yeah, of course. Listen, it'll make sense. Just let me finish. Okay. Of the 171 Republicans in the House in 1964, 136 of them voted for it. Of the 33 Republicans in the Senate, 27 voted for it. This is 79% of the House Republicans and 82% of the Senate Republicans. Okay, now if you want to break it down state by state,
we got it.
Go at it.
I can do that.
I just gave you the percentages. So why would the racists go run to the Republicans if they voted at that fucking clip. It's not making sense. So
Wait,
that's
why
all
would the racists go run to the Republicans?
Yes, the myth is after the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. See, no one even started off with what the myth is. This alleged party split is a claim made by liberals and progressives over decades. It's a political hoax and a conspiracy theory. So we're showing you back in 1964. Well, this is what I'm saying. Why would they have ran to these not so racist party? Like, hey, man, we're going to go run to the party that voted 79% for the Civil Rights Bill in 64 and 82% of the Republicans in the Senate. Those are the percentages. Now, who holds the longest filibuster ever?
Yeah, and then he changed parties. He's the one who changed parties.
I give you numbers, people.
He's
my
literally
data,
the one who changed fucking parties. You're not helping your case here.
So I agree with Todd on this one. So the Democrat Party was founded on slavery, Jim Crow, and segregation. That was their party mantra for over 150 years. When the Civil Rights Act passed, thanks to a majority of Republicans who passed it in the House and the Senate, even though Democrats had a larger number, the real reason for the switch, why the South is traditionally voting Republican now, especially in presidential elections, is not about race. It's more about economics and values.
Is it? No, there's no way that's true. Because I've been talking. No.
It's very true.
No, can I just tell you exactly what is? I've been dealing with a lot of groypers lately, and every single one of them, they are way more economically liberal, and they all say they would choose cultural issues over economics.
No one chooses cultural issues over economics.
Yeah, okay. I have video evidence that this is true. Okay.
But I'm saying the economics of the nation, because starting in the 70s, you saw the industrial decline of the Northeast, hence our term, the Rust Belt, right? That's Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. Those states lost their steel industries. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I'm a textbook case example of a Rust Belt.
States that were main, they've always been leading this charge.
You can see that with New York too. When New York flipped from red to blue because of they were starting to lose a hell of a lot of money and a hell of a lot of their businesses.
Always been progressive.
Have we defined what we mean by switch?
Go ahead, Anilus.
Have we even defined what we mean by switch? I mean, we kind of skipped over that Chicago mayor stuff. So,
well, she's not that important anyway.
Yeah, she's not important. She's stupid. Like,
she is
interviewing only black and brown people. That's a stupid idea.
It's racist.
Yes, it is racist. So yeah, we haven't even defined what we mean by switched. Like, some of us are talking about like the politicians, some of us are talking about the voters, some of us are talking about geography, and then others of us are talking about ideology. I mean, it's clearly
ideology, and
clearly the ideology has switched. I mean, what was it? All of those big government programs used to be endorsed by the Republicans. The socialists used to all support the Republicans. Like, for example, the International Working Men's Association, which is an organization of socialists, anarchists, communists, and trade unions. They all congratulated Abraham Lincoln for ending slavery and being the single-minded son of the working class. I don't suppose you think the International Working Men's Association would be voting for Republicans today, would you?
Well, if you go by what just happened with President Trump getting the most union support of any Republican president in the history of the country, then it's entirely possible that it would have.
President Trump, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, but you just compared him to other Republicans. So you said he had more union support than other Republicans, which kind of proves my point.
And that's simply because when you go to unions, and the reason I oppose and in favor of unions, depending on the type of union, because a lot of times unions get involved in businesses and they screw up a lot of things because it's a one for all for one type of thing where only one person gets to make the decisions when big unions come in like that. I've had that happen at my job when I was working doing healthcare for the Affordable Care Act. I was doing that for a number of years, and then this union came in there and we lost the contract because this union came in there and everybody lost their job. And then Maximus federal had to come in and purchase out our contracts so everybody could keep their job when I was working there. But it's unions are in support of the Democrats because the Democrats are just throwing money at them. I would be in support of them too if they just can constantly throw more money at me to get practically nothing done and nothing for no good reason. You take a look at the teachers union. The teachers union is getting money lobbed at them by Democrats, but they aren't performing any real actions to warrant any more increase in funding.
Can I ask you guys a question? What is a rhino? We all know what a rhino is. RINO.
Republican
Yes.
in name only.
Okay, and who would be classified as a rhino?
I would say McConnell is a rhino in my opinion.
No,
I'm not a fan of McConnell. I think
you mean the leader of
Yes, the
Senate
leader of-
Republicans is
Yeah.
not a real
Okay,
No,
Republican?
it's fine.
Okay,
Wait, I want to
mix.
hear from Justin, and I want to hear from the conservatives on this one. Who would be considered a rhino? So let's name off like 5 rhinos that you can think of.
you have McConnell, you have Romney, obviously.
Romney,
I
okay.
think another
Murkowski.
Murkowski.
What makes them a rhino, by the way?
I classify it as people have a low percentage by the American Conservative Union. Even Elise Stefanik, who took over as the number 3 person in the Republican House, has a lower rating on the Conservative Union than one of the members of the squad. I
But I
forget
have-
who it
Yo,
is.
Okay, so-
Brian
wait, hold on.
Fitzpatrick. Brian
I have a question.
Fitzpatrick,
Wait, hold on. So
rhino.
I have a question. Okay, so from what I know, Romney has voted quite often with Trump. So what makes him a rhino?
Well, in my opinion, what makes them rhinos is the policy that they support.
But the
not
policies, he's
necessarily-
voting for the policies, though.
A lot of the policies that Romney has voted for, as he's voted for just because everyone else is voting for it. When you actually take a look at what Romney ran on when he was running for president, which is why he was so unsuccessful in his bid for president, that's the reason why he's a rhino. All of his things are much more progressive than a traditional conservative would allow, and that's Romney's problem. And
So-
not only that, but Romney is also very, very inconsistent.
Rachel says all of them except Paul Gosar, Rand Paul, and I have to think if there are any more, aren't rhinos.
I wouldn't even call Rand Paul a Republican.
Nah,
I think he's an
yeah,
independent.
So-
Robin
so
Rand.
my-
Loyalist.
But
Rand
okay,
Paul's
but
a
my
loyalist is
question
what he is.
basically is how can somebody say that these people are rhinos yet still claim that they are the party of Lincoln and civil rights?
You don't have to necessarily be the same breed of Republican. I mean, that's like, for instance, using that same type of logic. I mean, Joseph Biden, who was our president, was trained by Klansmen when he was in the Senate, and
Wow.
Train.
You gotta let me go next. You
he's
gotta
got
let me go next after this.
he got his
gotta
his
let me go
bearings
Klan
from-
training for
from
Biden.
Robert.
Oh, you
I
gotta let
didn't
me
say
go
he
next
was.
after
I didn't
this.
say he was. I didn't say he was Klan trained. I said he was.
He's doing the
trained
Klan
Yeah,
training.
Senate
You heard it from DeAndre himself.
by Robert Byrd. He got.
Oof.
When you go back and you take a look at his record, particularly in '72 and '79 when he first got in there, when he did the anti-busing bill, and James Eastland, as I said
And
earlier,
all the Republicans were with him too,
Mississippi Democrat senator who was the head of the Judiciary Committee, Biden went directly to him and get support for those anti-busing bills and other bills like that. To say, even though Biden has said a lot of racist stuff, to say that Biden is the same type of Democrat that was a Jim Crow Democrat would be a hyperbole.
Yeah, because he's switched, right? His
we'll give
position
Alex.
switched.
All right.
I
Go
wouldn't
ahead.
say it's
Keep it under 2 minutes though, because we gotta make sure
we're.
we're having back and forth. And all right, go ahead.
2 minutes. Oh, you let these guys roll. Okay, so
I know, and we all have to do that, and that's how
Okay.
got to keep time.
I got you. Okay, so let's just cut down to brass tacks. Okay, back in the day during the Civil War, the Republican Party was predominantly progressive. Okay, when they tried to abolish slavery, the Southern Democrats were predominantly conservative. They wanted to keep things the exact same way. That's why they wrote in the Constitution they wanted to make sure that slavery remained the same. It was actually written in their Constitution, Article 4, Section 2. They actually made it abundantly clear they wanted to keep slavery. Now, you can go into the weeds about why the North is trying to abolish slavery. but at the same time, it doesn't really freaking matter at this point, okay? Now, anybody can say that there was no switch, however, the conservative right you'll always see the conservative right always proudly displaying the Confederate flag out there, because they are doing what? Protecting Southern heritage or protecting states' rights, as Justin mentioned earlier, states' rights, which in those days was the states' rights to own slaves back in the day, okay? Now, once the Civil War ended, once the Confederacy surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, offshoots of the Confederacy went off and they started the Ku Klux Klan. You know, Nathan Bedford Forrest was the very first Ku Klux Klansman out there.
And a Democrat.
A conservative Democrat. That's what people
still a Democrat.
It's a conservative Democrat. Now, this is what people need to understand.
A dino.
But here's what I'm saying, though, is that it's not so much that you see a large group of people that are transitioning over from one party to the next. It's because the ideology has remained the same. Not saying all conservatives are racists. Not saying all progressives are sweethearts and angels. It's just because the conservative base has remained essentially
Brittany
the same
does.
in the southern portion right here. Especially because I live down here in the South as well. Now, you're not going to see a progressive wave the Confederate flag out there. You're not going to see any of them talk about promoting states' rights right here. Now, if you want to talk about Republicans that were progressive at one point, Theodore Roosevelt was a progressive Republican. He was anti-big business, which is something that a lot of Republicans are today. He was pro-environment, which is something that a lot of Republicans are against. Nixon, a Republican, actually funded the EPA. During the 2016 presidential election, a lot of the Republicans wanted to get rid of the EPA. The Democrat Party at one point did support state rights, which is something that conservative base always holds on to this point. But then at one point they insisted that the Republican Party of the Union was encroaching upon and saying how they're going to suspend habeas corpus and they were going to take away our rights for the states to maintain our state sovereignty. But now it's the Republican base that maintains onto the state sovereignty right here. Dwight Eisenhower was a Republican, but he focused on you got to let me get there. So, but he focused on infrastructure right there. The Republican base very rarely focuses upon infrastructure. Dwight Eisenhower was also against the military-industrial complex. The Republican base lives off the military-industrial complex. The last president, once again, was big into the military-industrial complex. These are all facts that you cannot dispute right here. Anybody that tries to dispute them is just going to trip all over themselves. Point blank, period, bottom line.
The last president didn't fund wars across the nation.
Of course he did. Are you kidding me?
Of
course he did. Everybody jumped all over Joe Biden for bombing Syria, but yet he jumped over. But Trump did Syria too. Are you kidding me?
Let's go back to the 3/5 Amendment, which is what you're talking about. Your conclusion is incorrect. That was a compromise run by the abolitionist North against the slave-owning South to keep them from counting slaves towards the Congress, towards their representation. Without the compromise, as ugly as it was, we wouldn't have a nation. You would have had a southern part of the nation and a northern part of the nation, and probably would have been reconquered by the British in 1812. So the United States wouldn't even exist without that compromise. It didn't reaffirm slavery. It reaffirmed that black people are people too, but they shouldn't be counted if you're going to treat them as slaves. Free people are counted as one, but if you're going to have slaves, you're not going to get a full person out of that. It had nothing to do with, conservative Democrats, or it was about preserving the Union or creating the Union at that time. Because in 1790, in the census, there was, I believe, 1.9 million free whites in the North, 1.1 in the South, with 633,000 slaves. If everything had been proportionally equal, by the time the Civil War had started in 1861, there was 4 million slaves. Abraham Lincoln never becomes president. The Democrats constantly win the presidency and control Congress. You would have seen slavery expanded and a completely different, shape of this country.
But you just created a hypothetical situation that did not actually take place right there. That's the problem, though, because the Confederacy, that was the main basis for them seceding, is because they wanted to maintain.
They wanted to keep their slaves.
The main basis was not about slavery. I mean, that's the biggest thing. No, the main basis was about states' rights. Slavery was
right. Okay, states' rights do what?
States'
To do
rights
what?
to do what?
Yeah, that's
The-
get it.
The rights to not be dominated by the federal encroachment. You take a look at
Why?
so many of the actual
Conservative position.
generals that were part of the Confederacy, particularly Robert E. Lee. There was another guy, I can't remember his name, but a lot of their positions for actually fighting on the side of the Confederacy wasn't because of slaves. Many of the Confederate generals actually opposed slavery and hated it and wanted to abolish it, but they fought on the side of the Confederacy in order to preserve states' rights. That was the entire basis of the
States'
Confederacy.
rights to do what, though?
Slavery
Exactly.
was just icing on the cake.
I want to say about the Confederate flag and whatnot, though. Believe it or it was put up there by Democrats. Monuments were built by Democrats. It wasn't until Republicans started winning majorities in the Southern House and Senate and their governorships that the Confederate flags were coming down. In 2000, the South Carolina removed the Confederate flag from the actual Capitol building and put it on a Confederate memorial. That's something our old first sergeant was talking about one day.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Why
Remember
are
that?
Republicans?
Wait, no, stop.
Hold on,
Who waves the
everyone,
Confederate
shut up
flag
for 2
today?
seconds. Shut up. 2 seconds. I just have 2 seconds. Let me end, and then we'll go in a little bit of an order. My question, though, is why, if there was no switch at all, why is it that Republicans are the ones who are trying to defend Confederate statues? Why are they the ones that are defending the Confederate flag? Why are they the ones that are defending all this? I mean, how...
I'll tell you the easiest way to explain that.
If Democrats created the KKK, why is the KKK marching in Trump's name now?
The easiest way to explain that is the conservatives are not about tearing down statues, largely because of the preservation of history.
They care about history now.
The moment you erase any of that crap,
nobody's saying erase it. Every single person has said to put it in a museum.
As a matter of fact, I'm saying, as a matter of fact, you to put it in a museum, they just teared it down and burned it up in what was that South Carolina, when they just tore it down in the middle of the night and torched it.
Because you didn't want to put it in a museum.
But here's the deal. You take a look at what's happened in New York recently. A couple of years ago, you had Black Lives Matter go up there. They completely reversed history, had college campuses be resegregated because of Black Lives Matter. Things that should never have even come up. But when you start having young people come in here and completely shun history because they don't like what history had to say about it, you allow for the course of human events to repeat over themselves all over again. And that's the problem with that.
What are you talking about? It's what? It's not erasing history to not want to glorify people into statues.
I'm not saying that it's glorifying people, but you're not glorifying things. If you have somebody like, for instance, Robert E. Lee, if you wanted to know anything about him, because of his statue, because of that, people actually have projects where they can actually go and research it. Now, if you remove that,
there's nothing that says anything about them on like the statue. They don't. Right?
I'm saying that causes memorabilia, it causes exposure. Like, for instance, we have Martin Luther King Boulevard. There's one almost in every city. Knowing that name, you can go and research that, do things. Now, if you start to remove certain people from their statues or whatever they may be, particularly in the South, when you have talks today of, like, for instance, Texas talking about seceding from the Union, if you have all these different things that people aren't researching, they don't know any information about, you're just waiting for things to start to happen all over again.
So what's
Are
your
there
argument?
statues?
What's your argument? I'm sorry. What's your argument? I have no idea what you were saying.
Our argument is the preservation of history.
Are there
That's what museums are for. That is what museums are for.
Are there statues of Hitler in Germany?
What you do is you do what they did, what they brought up earlier, which was the commissions in 2003, where they would take it and they would, or 2000 and 2003 would take it and they would put it in there. You don't send rioters in the dead of night to tear things down. You actually vote on that.
Nobody sends those rioters, and nobody supports those rioters. Yeah, but the whole point is it's not being done through legislation. Now, do you think there are?
Let Annihilatus finish talking.
Do you think there are statues of Hitler still standing in, like, the public in Germany?
They're not.
And do you think they erase their history just because they don't have statues of Hitler around? because this is the level of your argument here.
So
if you really wanted to respect history, you would have put in those textbooks stuff like from the 1776 Project, learning about how systemic racism has affected
There is no
us through
such
the
thing as
generations.
systemic racism right now.
Well,
I would be curious though, who wakes up each day and sees a statue and becomes so offended that their whole life is altered where they have to tear it down?
It's not so much being offended, but if you look into the history, when those statues were erected, it was actually when the Civil Rights Act was like enacted, and especially once they started to bring in more rights to minority communities, that's when those statues actually started to get risen up to actually counter. It actually was. Look into the history.
I got it. I sent this to Brittany before.
Okay,
yes, I did. Go ahead.
What's the
it's
link?
not in the 60s.
Let's see the link.
It's not in the 60s. Keep going. I'll send it to you afterwards.
The 1960s and the 1920s.
The exactly. 20s was far more than in the 60s. So you'll agree to that, right? Like 5 to 1 more in the 20s.
But that's when they were trying to actually get more rights into place for that way for minorities to be able to vote as well. That's when you start to see all these. They weren't erected when the Civil War, after the Civil War was over with. That's the problem. There's no issue with us for putting these statues inside of a museum. Okay. The only thing is, like, it's not so much about waking up and feeling offended. Like, let's say, for example, the reason why people are saying these.
Somebody like going to the bathroom?
Yeah, it's not me. So, but the reason why people bring up this argument right here, like, for example, Fort Benning, for example, or Fort Bragg, the reason why people bring these up is, for example, Fort Bragg was named after one of the worst Confederate generals in the entire history of the Civil War. That's one of the reasons why they want to kind of rename that one right there, which actually kind of makes sense right there, is because we always talk about like how we don't celebrate the loser right here, but yes, for some reason we seem to celebrate the losers of the Confederacy right here.
Hey, Alex, I would challenge you right now with the state of our education in this country. Ask any one of your soldiers who Fort Bragg is or who he's named after, and they're going to have no idea. Now, they're not going to know Fort Benning. They're not going to know Fort Hood. I mean, we're talking about an educated class of people who actually know this. So I don't understand, how does that impact? We drove down Dixie Road every day, and I didn't think anything of it.
I feel better. Here's
my whole thing, though. Why is it we're always talking about how we don't celebrate the winners? We don't celebrate the losers, but for some reason we seem to be celebrating the losers.
Well, the losers were still part of the nation.
Well, the Confederacy is the losers, aren't they?
I don't care.
They were not part of the nation. They seceded from the Union. They were not part of the nation.
The Confederacy lose the war. Yes,
they were reintegrated in 1877.
Did they lose the war?
Yeah,
yes,
but at that point they were no longer Confederates.
Okay, guys, we gotta stop interrupting each other.
I'm sorry, I can't help it.
I don't think anyone is celebrating the Confederacy. I think what everyone is talking about is protecting the preservation of history. It's all about education. Like what Justin just said, the majority of people today know nothing of any of these generals or what they stood for. They don't even know most of the names of any of the generals. The only names that most people know are the names that are on these buildings and Robert E. Lee. They don't know the bulk of any of the people that actually fought in the war.
It's such an uneducated mob mentality. They're tearing down black abolitionist statues and leaders who supported the abolitionist movement. They're tearing down people who have nothing to do with it.
Wait, I have a question. Who is tearing them down?
The mobs. I mean, we saw the videos.
You mean people like it where their faces are all covered and nobody knows who's under it? What's going on in the background? Whose stuff is playing?
Not me.
Bad, DeAndre. Bad.
Dead silent here.
So it's kind of funny, like how we talk about the lack of education. When DeAndre brought up the fact that President Biden was instructed by Robert Byrd. DeAndre, do you know when Robert Byrd had his clanship? And when he renounced his clanship?
He renounced his clanship in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, and he later died in 2003.
Wrong. He renounced his clanship after only a year, and that was like in the late 40s, actually. And he actually, as a matter of fact, even though he voted against the Civil Rights Act,
he made it to exalted Cyclops in 1 year. Come on, bro. Cat.
Yes, he did.
Grand Dragon, baby. Grand Dragon right there.
Was not a clan dragon. There is no proof to back any of that upwards. Even though he opposed
Cyclops, that's what I
exalted,
said.
But Justin said Grand Dragon, of course. So, but anyway, even though he had voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he voted in favor of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And actually, as a matter of fact, he has a high approval rating with the NAACP. So why are we just suddenly going to go against?
Using the NAACP for anything that as it relates to
Well,
black people is
well,
garbage. The NAACP
well, wait a
hasn't
second.
been about black people's rights in a long time. The
So
fact
you're gonna
that
talk
they continue to push
it's
crap like Planned Parenthood in the black communities. By the way,
oh now we're gonna talk about Planned.
Democratic construction, which we
So
talked
now
about
we're gonna talk about
earlier,
Planned Parenthood
which on the
even
abortion
though
topic.
Margaret
You
Sanger
have
actually
Margaret
Alex,
Sanger.
let him finish. That's fine.
well,
Margaret
he didn't let me
Sanger.
finish.
I
I'm
know,
sorry.
but no, but he was talking, and I gotta let him finish. Go ahead.
Margaret Sanger, the founder of it, her entire reason for bringing that into our communities was to kill off the population.
Wrong.
You take a look. Oh,
Wrong.
are her words not correct? Where she's talking about
I bet you
preservation
found the
of
wrong
birth
context.
rights.
I mean, this is really bad faith
I
argument.
guarantee that you found it from a right-wing website that was anti-Planned Parenthood. Guarantee
No,
it.
all I did was listen to her own words.
Okay, so
Really?
let's
Where?
say you're right. Okay, let's say Margaret Sanger's intent was to kill off all the black people. Does that necessarily make abortion just wrong? Because
No, it doesn't
one
make
person who
abortion
supported
wrong.
it,
It doesn't
just
make
because
abor-
one person who
it
supported it
doesn't make
happened to
abortion
want it
wrong.
for
It
bad
shows
reasons.
it shows the correlation between the two. Where if they were pro the rights of black people, this wouldn't even be something to bring into the community. Where you having 5 times the rates of abortions happening in our communities versus happening
Why
in
do you
any
think
other
they're having
community.
so many more abortions?
Because it's readily accessible in the community.
But like, but no, why? I mean, like that. There
The
has to be more
Negro
to it.
Project.
Wait,
The
no,
Negro
hold
Project.
on.
Written in
No, why?
1939.
Stop for 1
Brittany,
second. Just
God.
stop. One second. Why do you think that more minorities end up having a lot of more abortions? Why do you think people get abortions?
Well, number one, because they had sexual experiences that they regret.
No,
usually.
that's before.
But
But like, why do you think they end up getting it afterward?
They want to get an abortion because it's readily available and they don't want to take responsibility for their actions.
Oof.
Oh, so black people don't want to take
do you
responsibility.
think it has anything
Black
to
people
do?
don't want to take responsibility for a
Do you
lot
think
of
it
their
has?
actions.
Do you think it has anything to do with economic reasons?
No, not at all. Because
Oh
if
my
it had,
God,
if
you
it had,
can't be
if it had
serious.
anything to
Brittany,
do with economic, if it had
please.
anything to do with economic reasons, they wouldn't be having frivolous sex in the first place. If you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, where we didn't have this problem of abortions in the black community, we were actually better off in the 50s, actually better off in the 20s, 30s, and the 50s.
Wait,
Oh
so
my
black
God.
people
As
were
a-
better
as
off
a-
before the
Hold
civil
on.
rights movement?
Yes, if you go economically, we were better off before the actual civil rights movement because we didn't have these programs that were gutting our family structure and moving the income out of our community.
Like the war on drugs?
Hold on a second. Okay, so first off, you're incorrect about the whole Margaret Sanger bit about like her wanting to exterminate the black people. That's completely incorrect. It's been taken out of context. Anybody that made that up, these are the same people that also said that she spoke at a Klan rally where she actually said the Klan is full of crazy people. There's a picture actually up there where they said that was her speaking at the Klan rally. That was actually an altered picture. They were actually saluting a cross. Now, what she had said about the black community, okay, was the fact that they had less access to care. That's why she was trying to encourage when it comes down to like for certain abortions, because, for example, it was more accessible to white people to get abortions because in this country, white people had always had access to abortions, not so much in the black community. That's why she was trying to encourage this. She was trying to encourage that there was actually a stronger stock of people, because that's exactly back in those days. That's what abortion was believed to encourage right there. So this concept of Margaret Sanger being this eugenics racist right here is completely false. It's actually incorrect. So this is the reason why a lack of education is, everyone's saying, oh, she's a racist. Why? Because of something they read from a site that might have more bias towards Planned Parenthood. This is something that we need to kind of delve into. I'm sorry, DeAndre, but this is something I've looked into in a great deal. I'm sorry.
How about
Our own
number?
words
How
when it
about
came to population
13%?
control. You have in the black community right now, thanks to Planned Parenthood, you have more than 646 abortions per day in the community. You couple that with the fact that in the black communities, due to the more than 7,000 deaths as related to black on black violence every year, over 250,000 deaths due to heart disease and diabetes and other things like that. Within our community alone, we have more people in our community that are dying than there are people who actually been born in our community. And Planned Parenthood is a direct proponent of that. You take a look at what's going on with them, where you have more than 36% of all abortions are performed by Black women. The bulk of abortions that are offered in these communities, Black women are doing it. It put it right there in the urban communities where we live at, and talk about accessibility. Her own words are akin to population control. You're just wiping out the population.
Okay. What was the reason for them getting abortions?
I'd already told you the reason for them getting abortions is to abdicate their responsibility.
Okay, why don't they want to take responsibility?
Why would you, when the option is to go out there and just fuck around, and then you can just go and get rid of the responsibility?
Why
and
is
do
that
it all
any
over
of your
again.
Business, though?
It's not my business. My business
Why are you worried about it?
It's the simple fact that
Why are you worried about it then?
My community is dying off as a result.
Why do you think Black people are fucking around?
What you have? What the estimations of Black population around 55, 60 years ago was that we were supposed to be within the next 20 years in the 1950s, we're supposed to make up around 30% of the population. Just a few years ago, our population was around 13.2%. We're still at a steady decline at 12.8% now. We're going down and decreasing as our death rate exceeds our birth rate.
Isn't that like a lack of infrastructure that might play into that, though?
It's not about lack of infrastructure. It's about the fact that that our people are not being born at a rate that exceeds the time that they're dying.
I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful whatsoever.
How do you get a birth rate that's lower than the death rate?
Well, here's my entire point, though. The reason why I talk about a lack of infrastructure right here is because, for example, you talked about all the other diseases like heart disease and whatnot, right? Like how that's like prevalent in the Black community. If you
entirely by the choices of the food that we eat.
Exactly, because if you go around in like certain neighborhoods like that, you're going to find that the health food choices are of lesser quality, the hospitals are of lesser quality. That's blatantly apparent right there. This is one of the things we have to take into consideration right there.
Look, you can talk about the health, the quality of food being less apparent. Nobody is forcing anybody of color to go to McDonald's and buy a big meal.
The lack of choice is there, though.
Lack of choices. Cheaper. No one's forcing you to do that. You can go. You have most of these people in these areas that are on fucking food stamps anyway. They're not spending any of their own real money on it anyway.
But if you're talking about infrastructure and lack of access, who controls these cities? It's been Democrats for 50 years. Look at
Republican districts that are like this too.
Look at the infamous meme of Detroit in 1950 and Hiroshima in 1950, destroyed by an atomic bomb. And then fast forward to today, Detroit looks like it's been hit by an atomic bomb. So it's proving that you can recover from it.
Hold on,
Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas is the exact same way, and that's
okay. Hold on, really quick, Alex. Time out. Okay, so we're gonna we have somebody else that's joining us really quick, so I'm gonna bring him on.
Todd, it's time for a hazing.
Yo, what's up?
So Kyle's here now. So the liberals are going to be outnumbered for a little bit, but
bring them on.
Well, I'm just here to like fact check one thing.
Get in here.
I don't know why, Alex. I don't know why you're denying that Margaret Sanger was like anti-black or was a racist. And the New York Times, this was like a couple weeks ago. The new CEO of Planned Parenthood repudiated Margaret Sanger, said, yeah, she was racist. We need to talk about it because we need to move on from her. Like, I really don't know why you're arguing that point.
What was the point? What was the point of the whole abortion? Like, was it to provide access to the Black community while the white community was getting abortions?
Let me read from you the New York Times article.
Answer my question. Hold on a second. Answer my question.
Yeah, I am by reading you the article. Up until now, Planned Parenthood has failed to own the impact of our founders' actions. We have defended Sanger as a protector of bodily autonomy and self-determination while excusing her association with white supremacist groups and eugenics as an unfortunate product of her time. This is a new CEO of the corporation Planned Parenthood saying this. This isn't me saying this. Isn't Ben Carson saying this on a Fox News interview. This is the new CEO of Planned Parenthood saying it. You didn't answer my
question whatsoever, though.
What was the question, then?
Well, you weren't paying attention. Okay, I asked, why is it that they're offering abortion care for the Black community while people of the white community who took up the majority of that bit in her day, why was it that the white people were taking up all the amount of
hold on, really quick, time out. Justin, are you taking off for good, or are you going to come back?
Yeah, unfortunately, I got to drop off. I got to go take care of a couple things.
All right, well, thank you for coming on.
Brother. Hey,
Alex, I'll get you later. So.
Okay.
Andre, it was nice talking to you. I'm glad we're all on the same side here.
Take it
easy.
Likewise.
Nice. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
All right.
Okay, so you said the New York Times article, but anyway, so she was offering care to those because she was trying to offer like eugenics to like have a stronger stock, as she used to say, as far as people are concerned. Because back in those days when she was trying to encourage more abortions in that general vicinity, white people were able to get this. Black people were not, because they were still considered second-class citizens. I mean, do you agree with that, or is that not true?
Are you saying that black people didn't get abortions before Roe v. Wade, like in her time?
They weren't allowed the same kind of quality health care as the white people were.
Well, we're not talking about healthcare quality. We're talking about abortion,
that
which
is
was illegal
healthcare.
no matter what.
But it was still some sort of care, because people were getting abortions from like the dawn of time, honestly.
This seems to be
We're
like
talking about in America, though, not the dawn of time.
We are talking about here in America. This is something that, what I'm saying is like white people were able to get abortions, regardless of Roe v. Wade. But the quality of care that they were getting is far different from like what black people were getting from back in the day.
You realize wait, no, that makes no sense, because one of the reasons Roe v. Wade happened, and one of the reasons that feminists advocated so heavily for Roe v. Wade was because everyone was getting illegal abortions, which were not safe. It wouldn't matter if they were white or black; they would still be unsafe abortions because it was illegal.
So you're saying that white people weren't able to get safe abortions, even though it was like in back alleys, but black people weren't? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying they were all unsafe. They're unsafe because they're murdering a child, but also for the mother, they were unsafe no matter what.
Well, wouldn't you consider abortion a medical procedure?
No.
Why not?
Where is all this going? I mean, this seems like a side quest.
Like, you're arguing semantics with me.
I'm not arguing semantics.
I'm trying to just prove to you that Margaret Sanger herself, yeah, she was racist. She was anti-black. I don't know why.
Okay, when you get done, like, go ahead and send me the link to that article that you're talking about, so I can take.
Yeah, right here. I sent it in the private chat of the Streamlabs. Literally, New York Times. It's literally says, "I'm the head of Planned Parenthood. We're done making excuses for our founder." I don't get like why you can be pro-abortion. I mean, I'll think like abortion's. I think abortion's evil, obviously.
Well, you can think it's
but
evil,
like, this is like not even an abortion debate. This is yes, the founder of Planned Parenthood was anti-black.
When I actually looked up into when she spoke to the Ku Klux Klan, I'd actually read an article as to where Margaret Sanger said that she went to the Ku Klux Klan rally, she got away as soon as possible because she felt that these people were just completely out of control, and she did not associate with them very much.
Well, then why'd she go to begin with?
Yeah, I don't know. Nobody even brought that up though. That's like a meme. Yeah, no one said anything. I just telling you that that's the inception. Like she's fucking racist, dude.
Does this even
you can
matter?
rescind it. Well, we were
Hitler was vegetarian.
It.
Hitler was vegetarian. Who cares? I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like the point is like, yeah, she was racist. Who cares? It's not. It's honestly is a moot point, but like you were denying it for some reason.
Well, I was bringing up the fact that everybody was trying to say like how she was this big proponent of completely like wanting to weed the black people out, which isn't true, because there is no proof, there's no context that actually backs any of that up. That's what I was trying to disprove right there, that her sole reason behind Planned Parenthood was getting rid of all the black people, which is not true, actually. That's what I'd actually stated.
Yeah. Sanger spoke to the Women's Auxiliary of the KKK at a rally in New Jersey to generate support for birth control. And even though she eventually distanced herself from the eugenics movement because it's her turn, she endorsed the Supreme Court's decision, Buck v. Bell, which allowed states to sterilize people deemed unfit without their consent. So she may have turned away from it from the fucking Ku Klux Klan, but she still supported it.
She still supported the Ku Klux Klan? Where did it say anywhere?
No, not the Ku Klux Klan. She still supported eugenics, even though she turned away from the Klan.
Okay, so what does that mean then?
It means she still supported eugenics.
Okay, and
eugenics historically has been used to be anti-black.
Really? What other cases you want to talk about?
Like almost every single one in America, at least.
Like what?
Like, I don't get, why are you like trying to debate, bro, your way out of this? Why are you like so incredibly like unable to admit that she was racist?
Example. Dude, why are you getting so paranoid right now? I'm asking for another example. That's it.
I'm getting paranoid, bro. You're staring straight like into the camera, trying to debate, bro, your way out of saying Margaret Sanger was racist. Like, why can't we just admit that?
Okay, I'm gonna say it once again. Okay, what I'm saying is that everybody was trying to say that Planned Parenthood was devised to get rid of black people, and I said that is not So I said she was trying to afford these same opportunities to ensure that black families were given the same opportunities that some white people could not get when it comes down to abortion. That's what the point I was trying to make right there. And now you just stepped in, and now you're trying to bring up eugenics right here. And I was asked, what's another example? And you just kind of went off on a tangent. So I'm just asking, what's another example, please?
Another example of eugenics against blacks? I don't know.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't know the full history of eugenics in the country. I know that Margaret Sanger supported it for blacks.
Okay.
Can we talk about abortion itself rather than go through like a side quest about history? That seems much more interesting to me.
Yo,
Yeah.
weren't
It is one of the topics.
explain yourself, because when you did your interview, you were saying you were like kind of pro eugenics. Explain that.
You said you did mention
you said
eugenics.
that. So go ahead.
Oh yeah, I am pro eugenics, but not like Sanger type eugenics. I'm not
qualifier. Go ahead.
Well, yeah,
So
I
you're
mean,
more
it's
so
just,
pro eugenics for everybody, not just one particular sect.
yeah, like race has nothing to do necessarily with eugenics. I just think all children deserve to have a good upbringing, and if you want to be able to be, because children don't decide to be born. Nobody chooses to be born, right? They're forced into it. So if you are going to force a child into a shitty life, you might as well make it as little shittiness as possible. Therefore, eugenics. Of course, how far you want to go with that is really, really. It could be a slippery slope if we don't handle it carefully. But
can I ask you a
conceptually-
follow-up question?
Sure.
Real quick. How is your relationship with your father coming up?
I don't get it.
I'm
Well,
asking.
one of the things with my channel is my
and you might
personal
not
life
be
is
cool.
completely unimportant.
Okay, fine, no problem.
It's not
all
unimportant.
found-
It's not actually, but go on.
You're right. Continue. You're right.
I mean, again, I've used this example quite a few times, but does anybody here think that incest is okay? Because I don't like incest. I think it's generally bad for people to be born with severe genetic diseases. And so if everybody can agree that incest should be disallowed, then we all at some level decided that genetic diseases are bad. And so at some level we all agree that eugenics is necessary.
I wouldn't go that far. My thing is, I believe that you can have abortions for things like incest, rape, and the life of the mother. But when it comes down to incest and anything that is not forced or rape, or anything that is not causing the mother to die, that choice is on them. If brother didn't forcefully penetrate his sister, they're just out there fooling around in the Alabama barn somewhere. That choice is on them.
I have a question for the pro-lifers. So are you guys saying that life is always going to be more important, even if there's suffering? You would still choose life, even if there's going to be suffering?
I've never said that. My statement has always been that people should be responsible for their actions. Now, when you come down to the case where you have to sacrifice a life to save another, that's a moral decision that has to be made by the mother of that case. And
okay, you just flipped on a position though.
I have never flipped my position. I
talked
about this all day yesterday.
You flipped on abortion. You first insinuated that abortion was like a form of genocide on black people because giving people access to abortion was destroying like the black race or something like that. Now you're talking about personal responsibility.
It destroyed the black community.
You flipped on personal responsibility based on what's convenient
at the beginning of all of this. I said when we did the abortion topic at the beginning,
based on what's
I said people need to be responsible for their actions. My only exceptions have to abortion has ever been if the mother's life is in jeopardy or in the cases of rape. Everything else is a choice.
Okay, so then why are you talking about how like Planned Parenthood is secretly like genociding black people?
Planned Parenthood is put in the black community. It is there made readily accessible so that they can be used to do that.
So it's black people who take personal responsibility to apparently genocide themselves. I guess
you're right.
So
you're right about that. It's
is Planned Parenthood okay or is it not?
I don't know. I don't think Planned Parenthood is okay because Planned Parenthood's biggest opponent being abortion is the opposite of Planned Parenthood, obviously. If it was more so about contraception and safe sex and putting those systems in the community, okay, perfectly fine. But to abdicate responsibility of one's actions, just go out and have an abortion just because you can't keep
take
your legs
responsibility
closed.
by having an abortion. That is taking responsibility.
Taking responsibility would be not fucking getting pregnant.
Wait, why not?
Why would you go out there and have sex with just anybody and everybody?
Because it's fun.
When the potential of diseases that you can have out there.
Okay. So if you get a disease,
if you want to
take
talk about being
responsibility by going to the doctor and curing the disease.
If you want to talk about being responsible for the actions that you do, you will be responsible for the potential to bring life into this world by having protected sex. If you're going to go out there and just have sex with anybody, especially if you may be a potential carrier of some disease, considering that most people in the United States right now have a sexually transmittable disease and don't even know about it.
What?
And you're going to go and have frivolous sex with just anybody and everybody and fuck someone's life over because you don't want to take responsibility for what you can control.
Wait, fuck whose life over?
The person that you may be passing on your transmitted diseases to.
What? Okay, well, yeah, that's responsibility. But if you get a disease, then you go to the doctor and cure the disease if you can, or treat the disease.
You can't cure herpes. You can't cure HIV.
Yeah, so that is that is personal responsibility. So if you have sex unprotected and get an STI, then you have the responsibility of having that
the
STI.
Same thing.
Now.
You have the responsibility of the risk of pregnancy as well.
What about paying for the abortion? Wouldn't that be like the responsibility?
So if you get pregnant,
she should pay for it 100%.
Yeah, I agree. And then you take responsibility for the pregnancy by terminating it. There's no problem.
I would not go that far. Just going around and playing God with someone's life is foolish.
Oh yeah. So having the pregnancy in the first place was okay then.
Having the pregnancy in the first place showed your
I think
responsibility.
it's much more playing God with someone's life to create it and force them into this shitty world of ours than it is to responsibly terminate it and make sure that you don't cause like huge
what is responsible about terminating life? I could say the same thing about the abolishment of slavery, where they had they spent generations debating the issue of whether or not they could abolish slavery. Yet people like Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin that were all proponents of abolishing slavery, but they said, well, we can't abolish slavery outright because we don't know how the slaves will react to being put into a civilization and a society in which they don't know the laws of the people, or there's a language barrier, or how they've been treated, versus just, well, because they were brought into the country under shitty circumstances, let's just terminate all of them so that they don't have to live in the same shitty circumstances.
That is a laughably bad argument. If the slaves really wanted to be slaves they could just work for free. They could just work for free if they still wanted to be slaves. So you could give them a choice by freeing them. If they wanted to, they could work for nothing but food and shelter.
Did they have a choice to come here?
No, and I think coming here was forcing them to come here.
They didn't have a choice to come here.
Since
but you wouldn't terminate them because
because they already exist. If they want to kill themselves, they can do that instead. I don't need to make the choice.
It's the same thing for the fucking child.
No, you can't. They can't kill themselves.
You don't just terminate the child because you don't want the child to come into a shitty life. Put it up for fucking adoption.
No, but then it's already in the shitty life. If you put them, if you give birth to them, they are already in the shitty life. Life is always shitty.
We do it all the time, actually. We play God all the time. Are you kidding? Consider the fact, if you want to talk about adoption, there's 127,000 children waiting to be adopted right now in foster care.
Versus 48 million that have been killed due to abortion.
48 million.
My point is
that total or is that total? Okay, what were the circumstances of those abortions?
It doesn't matter the circumstances. You have 128,000 people for adoption versus 48 million people that are dead.
No, they're not people. They're clumps of cells that have not achieved personhood.
This is exactly my
point. But they haven't achieved personhood. That can mean a lot of things. So, I mean, not to bring up the slavery thing again, but that's the most obvious comparison to the idea of personhood.
Slaves were not considered people. They were considered property.
Still were.
So it was the same.
They were not considered people, but they were people.
I'm going to start muting people. All right. So because we haven't had Kyle on at all, so like let's give him a little bit of time and then have some back and forth. But stop interrupting. Go ahead,
Interrupting is fun. I'm fine with interrupting. But with like the idea of personhood, like that can mean a lot of things at a lot of separate times. I really don't think that's a good enough justification for abortion.
What? I don't get it. So, what's your standard then?
The standard is at conception, it's a life.
Okay, yeah, but the cancer cells like living in your brain are also alive. I don't
But
think
it's
that's a
not
good
going.
enough
A cancer
standard.
cell isn't going to become a human, though.
Oh yeah, neither is an embryo.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's not unless you incubate it inside the womb, but that's an active process. It's not going to do it by itself.
The embryo. Wait, in biology, isn't the embryo the one that's already like fertilized?
Yes, but
Yeah,
it still
in
won't.
biology,
It won't
embryo is
turn into a
already
baby.
alive.
It won't turn into a baby unless you incubate it in the womb.
It's already alive when it becomes an embryo.
You don't even have your
alive.
biology straight, though.
At the stage of a zygote, it's still technically already alive.
If you said a
Yeah,
zygote,
but-
maybe, but like
Yeah, but as I
embryo?
said, the cancer cells living in your brain are also alive.
The cancer cells are mutated cells that are already in your body. They're part of you. It's not
Yeah,
like
and they're already alive.
It's not like they're going to spring out from you to be something else.
Okay, so they're going to spring out to be someone
Oh wait,
else.
what? I should
Okay.
not check that.
Okay, so an embryo is not going to spring out of you and then turn into somebody else unless you incubate it in your womb.
An embryo is going to spring out. It's just the definition of being a fucking embryo is to turn into a fucking child and be born.
Okay, so you're arguing by definition now.
It's not. It's wait,
Are you
there's
in
no
the definition,
semantics to
bro?
this. If it's an embryo, it's going to become a child.
No, it's
There's
not.
no.
Not
there's-
unless you
there's no
incubate in the
definition
womb.
to what does an embryo become if not a child?
It
But
dies.
you do realize conception happens in the womb to begin with, right?
No, it happens in the fallopian tubes.
Yeah, and where does
What
it
are
go
you
after
talking
that,
about?
right? And it's still in the fucking female reproductive system.
So
It's like
that
effectively the
doesn't
same
mean that
thing. It's only going to travel one way.
Yeah, but you
It's
still need.
kind of a moot point just because it's in one place of the female body
so the
at
female-
one point, and then literally
I
5 seconds
mean,
later it's going to be at
So
another
said
point.
female can remove the embryo from her fallopian tubes if she wants to.
Wait, do you think abortion is like that intricate? Abortion in like
be.
the first 6 weeks is literally either like popping a pill.
Yeah, so I don't care how the abortion is done.
The rest of
I'm
it
just talking
is-
about
is
abortion.
just crushing up the baby's body and sucking it out with a vacuum cleaner.
I have a question. So, what if they are able to do it in a way there is no harm there to the like where they don't feel anything, nobody feels anything, and it's quick and painless, and it's done? What is
No,
your
that was
is your main objective about like ripping it out or like because I hear that quite often?
That's not my main objective to it at all. My main objective to it has always been personal responsibility and accountability. The responsible
You're breaking up a bit.
I'm sorry, it's a little bit further away. A responsible adult
Still breaking up.
does not go. What is this better?
No.
Oh, man,
Yeah.
let me.
The responsible adult allows other people to make decisions for themselves as well. The adult you're talking about, which you think is responsible, has made a decision for someone else. I find that morally reprehensible.
Yeah, I
A
agree. Making a
responsible
decision to
adult
kill
is-
somebody is reprehensible.
Yes, I agree.
It's not
with Kyle.
somebody yet.
So
It's only somebody if you
responsible-
bring
a
him into this
responsible-
shitty world of ours.
So frivolous acts of just any.
So
So yeah,
what's funny
by-
is that, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So by creating a child and putting it into this shitty world of ours, we are choosing for someone else. We are depriving people of personal responsibility to live or not live based on their own choosing.
Wait a second. You're depriving people of personal responsibility by killing them.
DeAndre, you might want to sign out and sign back in. It might
No,
work better.
no, they don't exist by the time you kill them. They don't exist yet.
Except they do.
No, they don't.
I mean, this is like honestly a pointless conversation because I'm pretty sure you're a Satanist by your like avatar. But like, you do realize that it is still alive, right? Like, you are killing a
Yes,
thing.
and
Even if you don't believe
cancer
it's a
cells
person,
are
it is
also
a
alive.
thing. Yeah,
Okay,
but a
yeah,
cancer
so
cell isn't a
bacteria
human.
are also alive.
A cancer cell would be part of human body. It wouldn't be the human body.
Yeah, but
Fucking
you
called
can
you a
remove
statement. I'm
just
sorry.
because it's
I think
alive
he
doesn't
might
mean
be.
it's
I
of
think
moral
he
worth.
is.
That was so funny.
We've moved away from.
He
like, the
keeps
main
saying
topic,
about this shitty world. Like, I had a good childhood, dude. Don't
Yeah,
fucking
I'm
put that
sure
shit
you
on
did,
me.
but what
Yeah,
if
I
someone
did.
else doesn't?
I don't know.
Okay,
Even
so should we
from
just
him,
kill all
bro.
poor kids?
No, because
Nobody
they can
says
kill
anything about
themselves
poor
if they
kids.
want to.
Wait,
Nobody
what?
says anything about
So
poor
wait,
kids.
so
I'm
because they can
sorry.
kill themselves, we shouldn't
don't
kill
need to
poor
do it
kids
for
because their
them.
life is shitty?
How many cuts do you
You're breaking up too, Don. What's going on here?
I don't know. This website sucks.
Oh.
have?
Oh. Well, what the funny part is that like 92% of abortions that take place in the first 13 weeks, and then you got 6.9% that take place in the 14 and 20 weeks of gestation, and then only 1% takes place in the late stages. And these are only usually reserved for like the most serious cases right here, which is why like 92% of abortions that take place is always in the first trimester, very, very, very early on right there. And this is according to the CDC.gov actually. So usually like when it comes down to like in the late term, by this point they've already picked out a name, they've already like gotten the baby crib, they've already gotten all the decorations to welcome the baby into the world, but then like a very serious medical situation that might take place. And I'm pretty sure these parents have actually gone to as many doctors as they can to find out what their options are, and they've probably been told the absolute worst news of their entire life. Brittany, that's a Mayor Pete point right there. I remember him saying that actually. But this is exactly the situation they might actually have to go through. I have still have yet to hear of any situation to where a woman is in the late stages in the third trimester of her pregnancy and she's like, fuck it, I just don't want to have a baby. I still have yet to hear of any of these cases. But at the end of the day, still, we're not going to hear about these cases because like it's HIPAA, let alone the fact a lot of this shit has absolutely nothing to do with this. And what's so funny is like everybody talks about how we need to focus on, we need to be pro-life, but yet we tend not to focus on the living right the hell now. We tend to say, well, you just need to be more responsible. Well, guess what? You should have been at the right place at the right time kind of deal. We tend to just cast off this personal responsibility and tend not to give a shit about people once they're born. So I'm just wondering, where is it we start caring about life, and when do we stop caring about life? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, if I can add, like our infant mortality rate is much higher than other developed countries. It's actually like laughable.
Okay, well, just to go, like, I guess you're just moving along conversation, which is fine. But I mean, America has a pretty extensive welfare system, and we do take care of our citizens while they're alive. I really don't know what that has to do to abortion. I know that's like a pretty common, like very basic liberal talking point. It's like, well, pro-lifers only care about them when they're in the room. The second they're born, they want them to die, put them up by like bootstraps, blah, 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 blah. That's really just irrelevant to the abortion question, because the abortion question, as you said, literally 90+% of them happens in the first 6 weeks of pregnancy. It's not about their life yet. Their life is a whole other policy discussion about healthcare, about, job opportunities, education, stuff like that. That's a whole separate conversation from abortion.
Well, the reason why I brought that up, though, was because when it comes down to the topic of Planned Parenthood, is because everybody focuses on Planned Parenthood as this like baby killing factory when they also offer many other services. For example, how to like the morning after pill, or what kind of sex education they can actually offer. But yet everybody focuses on Planned Parenthood as this evil place that sells off baby parts, when that's actually been disproven as well, because the person that made that argument has actually been disproven as well.
Oh, no one's suggesting that they're selling baby parts.
But that's my point.
Well, I am.
I've
I
heard
like baby parts. I'm a Satanist. I love
Yeah.
baby parts.
He's the Satanist. Change your name to Satanist, Alice.
My thing is about that. It's about the fact that their primary service that people go to them for is for an abortion. If people were going to them for contraception, safe sex education, that would be perfectly fine. I wouldn't mind funding that. But the fact that we're funding expansions just to build more buildings and neighborhoods to give people who are already making poor life choices response, an opportunity to just bail out of other poor life choices. You talk about our mortality rate amongst young people. It's all within inner cities where it's back to poor life choices, where you're just letting people run amongst in the streets and kill each other, gun each other down. Again, the problem with Planned Parenthood to me, as far as what's concerned with race, has been that it's been where it is, and the fact that it's within the communities like that are the most suffering as far as it's since
Your internet is like acting up. It's really choppy. It's really choppy.
Yeah. So your argument is that people who make poor life choices should become parents?
No, my argument is not that. My argument is that people who make poor life choices should be responsible for the choices they make and not dictate.
Yeah,
whether
so
or
the
not someone
child
else
should be
gets to live
saddled
or
with a
die.
terrible life because some people out there made poor choices. That's your
My
argument?
mother made a lot of poor choices, but when I was born, I was given to somebody else, and they took care of me.
I'm actually
so-
I'm actually a little curious because we didn't have Kyle in the beginning. What he thinks the Supreme Court ruling is going to be. Do you think that they are going to go in the conservative way, or do you think it's going to get thrown out?
No, it's just a boogeyman that the idea of Roe v. Wade ever being overturned, it never will be.
Well, I don't think that they're even trying to overturn it. They're trying to like cripple it.
Well, even if they like repealed Casey, I really just don't think they would. There's just the Supreme Court knows that, like, and we like to pretend that the courts are, that especially the Supreme Court is this like bastion of justice, this bastion of individual sort of separated from the political situation. They're not. The Warren Court from 1950 to 1980, proves this. Even the court, with gay marriage and all these other decisions, even in this century, proves that they're not separated from politics by any stretch of the imagination. There's just be so much pushback if there was like any court rulings against abortion to where none of the justices would go through it, besides for maybe Clarence Thomas and like Alito.
Well, I mean, about the
new one, yeah.
up, right? Yeah, where it's like on 15 weeks of a Mississippi case is what they are doing. And that means, I guess, that 4 out of the 5 judges thought that the case was worth hearing. So I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I'm not sure when we find out about that. I think it's like in a few months or something.
Yeah,
it'll be in the 2022. It's going to be like front and center on that for sure.
Yeah, there's probably going to be a bunch of like state level policy votes on abortion.
Have you always been pro-life?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Have all of you guys always been with what your stance is now? DeAndre, have you always been pro-life?
No, I was raised as a Democrat, as a liberal. I've always been, I would say, pro-life, but my stances on most things have not always been the same because I was raised not to believe in personal responsibility in the same sense that I do now. I'm still raised to believe in being responsible for what I would do, but it was more race game, defer things onto other stuff.
Can I ask a question though? I tend to see a lot of the pro-life stance comes from a religious place. So I mean, even we have a lot of pro-life people in our party that are religious, but they.
Yeah,
You're from Mississippi?
We're Bible thumpers down here. So
wait, did you say? Wait, you're from Mississippi?
Yes.
You didn't even think about mentioning that when we were talking about the case.
Oh, he did. He
did.
He was away,
I was having to go yell at like people.
But
man, he got it.
But okay. I mean, you look here in Mississippi, particularly when it comes to Black people in Mississippi, the vast majority of them are all pro-life, especially because as far as Black people are concerned, Mississippi has the largest population per population density of Black people in the country. Not population mass, obviously, but there's almost as much Black people in Mississippi as there are white people. So
doesn't it have like the highest? Is it one of the highest like Black population in which state?
The highest Black population in the country as far as population density is concerned, anyway. Not population mass. Chicago, I think Chicago and Houston would still have us
like I think there was one. Was it South Carolina? Maybe. Does anybody know in the chat?
If we want to get specific, the District of Columbia is the blackest
No, but there's
part of the United States.
The-
It's 60%.
There's a state.
Yeah.
I think
And
it
then-
might be South Carolina.
Of like actual states, it is Mississippi. It's 36.3%.
Okay. I don't know. I'm
If
talking
you look
about
at a map of Mississippi, like on the river part of the state, the western part, that's where all the black people are, and then the east is
Yeah,
where all the
down
whites
the,
are.
the south on the south coast, all the way up until you get up to around the Delta region. You mean it's mostly black people. Like when I first moved to Hattiesburg, when I got back from San Antonio in 2016, I went to Hattiesburg to start working there, and I went there. We had a building with CMS, the Centers of Medicaid and Medicare Services, and I went to work there. And there's 2,000 plus bodies in that building. And the first thing that I said was, where the hell are all the white people at? Because I had never been in a place where I saw like no white people. Because the city's just full of so many black people. It's like more than 50,000.
Yeah.
That's a large population for us down here in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and like, so we did kind of. I mean, abortion was on the weekly stuff that we were talking about. It wasn't the main topic of our night. Well, yeah, I mean, but we did have this on our topics. But our main topic was whether or not the parties have switched. I don't know if you guys want to dive into any of that more, or we should just kind of go into. If you guys want to start sending questions in, you can send them in. Because we probably will shut this down in a little bit. Kyle, you're going to join us next Friday, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And
Now you're committed to
my
it.
schedule
Now you're committed to it.
Let's have
On air.
let's have Kyle
On
weigh in
air. You guys all heard it.
Actually, I'd like to hear Kyle weigh in on that topic. Actually, is whether the
on the party switch.
Yeah, actually, that would. Yeah.
I think you'll be surprised what I have to say because I know way
hear
too much about the history of this country.
Okay.
Go for it.
Like, well, first off, what do you mean by party switch? Do you mean like the PragerU talking point about like how the Democrats were the real racists and now they're not or something?
Yes, do it. Get in there.
Well, the PragerU talking point is bullshit. The Civil Rights Act was passed by Northern Republicans and Northern Democrats and Republicans in the West and Democrats in the West. It didn't really matter what party you were in. It more mattered geographical location, where you were from, whether you voted for the Civil Rights Act or not, or whether you supported civil rights or not. A big example of this is actually the 1968 election, where George Wallace ran third party. And if you look at an electoral map of Florida of that election, Nixon won the state, but where Wallace did the best was in the northern part of Florida. And back then, this was before, the 20th century. So back then, the northern part of Florida, which was basically just, Alabama still, they're still ancestrally Democrat, very, very, they were Dixiecrats up there. And they've all voted for George Wallace. They didn't vote for Hubert Humphrey. And meanwhile, Nixon won, central Florida, and then Hubert Humphrey won Miami and Broward counties. So the idea of the party switch of like this narrative that right-wingers come up with to kind of cope with being called racist, saying, no, we're not racist, it's you guys, because these people that were, Democrats, they voted against the Civil Rights Act. It's kind of missing the point. It's missing a lot of history, and I think it's a really dumb talking point.
Also, it just doesn't really matter that much because either way, the Republicans are the racists now, and that, I mean, it doesn't really matter what happened in the past.
I would say I would
completely
disagree to that. I mean, the Republicans aren't the ones that are using race as every talking point that they can possibly have. Every voting thing comes down to race. They talk about systemic racism. Who talks about that? The Democrats. They talk about systemic racism, but you go to all of these cities where black people live at, even here in Mississippi, where the black people are concentrated at, the local officials are all Democrats.
Yeah,
in
because cities
Chicago,
are always
they're all
Democrats.
Democrats.
Cities
The
are always
chiefs of
Democrats,
police,
but if you look at the states,
all Democrats.
That's not entirely true, but go on.
I mean, you look at all of these issues and problems are all created by the people that live in those particular cities. Now, most of the responsibility is based upon the actual individual voters, since they're the ones that continue to vote for the nonsense. But the fact is that they're voting the same people in there over and over and over again, and they're talking about the system when they are doing nothing to change the system that they keep voting for.
So you think so? If you're saying that the situation voters are in are because of their personal responsibility, why do you think it is that black people just make poor choices? Do you think they're like dumb or something?
Oh, according to Biden, we are. Black people make poor choices in this country simply because it's more convenient. If you live in say Chicago, where there are no male role models, or the nuclear family structure has been almost completely degenerated, which is what Black Lives Matter wants to
That's
completely
not true.
degenerate that. It was on their website. Well, but when you go there and you have the lack of fatherhood, the lack of male role models, lack of any real structure, and you combine that with the copious amounts of media, particularly what's in the music that we tend to listen to in our communities, where it's just glorifying gang violence and all that crap, and then you go live into the community and that's all you're going to see, because they're going to, it's particularly young boys, they're going to go out there and they're going to find a role model in someone and in something, and the streets will be the ones that teach them. So the poor choices and things that have been made mostly in these cities. Down here in the South, we don't typically have that much of a problem, again, because we're a Bible thumping South. Most of us in the South, particularly Black people in the South, are heavily religious. So there is structure even when there's fatherlessness in our communities. We still have that role model from the church, that role model from the school. There's always somebody there to give us structure. You go into these inner communities, there is no structure. It's just bedlam and chaos.
But
Do you
that's
think
not
that they
even
are not
true.
religious, though? That people in inner cities and stuff, do you think they're not religious?
If they are, they're not practicing. What I mean by
this is
that
not
is,
even true. Like black people aren't less likely necessarily to stay with their kids. That this is just a myth. They're not
I
less
didn't
likely
say
to get
Black people
married,
were less
but
likely to stay with
but
their
they're more
kids.
likely to. They're just as likely to stay with
I
their
never
kids,
said
unless
that.
they're locked up in
I never
prison
said
because of
that.
our.
I said that
We weren't talking
I said that
about marriage.
that
We
you
were
look
talking
at
about
the
religion.
that you look at the percentages right now, where 50 years ago, Black people were married at a higher rate than white people were. We had two-parent households at a higher rate than white people did.
Right before TV and all this stuff was like
Exactly.
popular. Yeah, so
And
like I mean these things are
now,
going to influence people.
Yeah.
now you come into right to today, where it's completely reversed. Whereas before it was practically 75% of all Black households are married. Now it's over 80% that all Black households are run by one parent, usually the mother.
Can I ask you a question?
This is not a dichotomy.
Wait,
Like
can I
black
want to
black
ask you a
fathers.
question really quick? Because you said, you know, you want them to be raised by their parents and stuff, but then you also said that you don't think that people should be getting abortions. So if people are getting abortions that might not be able to have a child with a two-family home, wouldn't that be raising a child in
No,
the kind of environment that you're
not
talking
exactly.
about?
I'll use my life as an example.
Sure.
My father was, God knows where, when I was born. Hell, I think he was in jail the majority of my life. I've only met him 3 times. He lives in Texas. My family lives in Mississippi. When I was born, my mother was not prepared to take care of us. As a matter of fact, she lost all 4 of us. If it wasn't for some random woman, she's now deceased, my granny, she's my god grandmother, they basically adopted me without having to do any legal paperwork and took care of me. And that was the male role model, because her son was a friend of my mother's, brought me into their family as if I was his own blood son, and they took care of me. Then around 4 years old, my biological grandmother and them, they just kind of showed up and kidnapped me and just took me, and I've been living there ever since. But I don't regret any of that, because I've gained significantly a moral code, a structured life, because the church, I didn't have a lot of male, I didn't have a father, but I never had a lack of male role models. I had my pastor, my deacons, I had the the male teachers at the school. I was always in something, in some type of program, my uncles, everything. So I always had that type of role model. So there's always an option. You know, the old saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And the case for me, that's exactly what happened, and that's typically what happens down here in the South. I don't know how it is up in the north, but down here in the South, that's typically how it happens. Where here in Mississippi, and particularly where I live out, which is in a rural country area, we still don't lock our doors because there's no reason to. Everyone, white and black, that
I
lives
think
in the
it's a lot of.
community,
Well, yeah, I think a lot of like rural areas are like that. But
you
let's
know,
we're
Can
gonna
I
get
jump
into
in?
like start to wrap it up, and then we're gonna
Yeah.
get into some questions and
Yeah,
stuff.
can I jump in? I mean,
Really quick, because we're gonna have to get into the Q&A in a bit. So just
okay, so in your personal anecdote there, which is very nice, you talked all about like your family and how that developed, but I noticed none of that was controlled by you. For a guy who was talking about personal responsibility all the time, the circumstances you were born into with your family seems to take up a huge portion of the way you explain yourself.
there are several things in life that you cannot control. What you're responsible for is that which you can control. I'm responsible for all of my actions that are made, therefore, by me. The actions leading up to me are responsible for those things. But there are significant amounts of stuff that you have no control over in your life.
I
As a matter of
agree.
fact, the majority of your existence in this universe you have no control over. But what you do have control over is completely up to you.
Okay, so then why do you deny things like systemic racism exist?
Because there's no proof of it.
But you just
If
talked
you
about how
have
your father
if
was
you
in
have
jail.
my
Like
father
if
being
we
in
didn't
jail,
have the war on
my
drugs or
father
like
be-
military and
my father
the
being in
prison
jail was
industrial complex,
completely
this might
How
not
you know
happen.
he was selling drugs,
my
man?
father being in jail was completely his own fault. Nobody told him to go out
Are
there and
there
break
are
the law.
there are there systemic factors making people more or less likely to commit
No, not
crimes?
at all.
Oh, so people
The only thing that are making people more or less likely to make crimes are their own fucking choices.
okay,
Wait, what did
so
you say your
Guys-
father was in jail for?
I have the slightest idea.
so
I've
there
only
are
Okay, so why are we like
met him
making
3 times.
assumptions here?
what I didn't make any what
You
I'm just
kinda
talking about.
did.
No, I said I was talking about like war on drugs. That's one thing because I'm
Yeah, the
talking
war on
systemically.
drugs.
Okay,
We don't know if the father was in jail for drugs.
that and the prison industrial complex. That was
That's
two
designed
parts.
around the war on drugs,
Which
according
needs
to
to
you.
be
Yeah, that
abolished.
and criminalizing poverty
Which
and a
needs
lot
to be
of things.
abolished.
There's like debtors prison still basically. I mean there's a whole system that goes into this, and then DeAndre is just basically denying that it exists and that like
Because it does.
black people are just choosing to commit more
Black
crimes.
people. Look,
I
I'll
guess because
tell you this. You take a look at the statistics and data right now. Black people are committing more than 54% of all the violent crimes that are happening right now.
yeah,
Nobody's
so
telling black people to go out there and do that. Black people have to be responsible for the choices that they make.
okay, so why do you think
people,
they do that?
White people can commit the majority of all types of all car thefts and bank heists, but nobody's calling that systemic racism. That's white people's choice. Black people are out there wanting to gang bang. That's their choice. They
Okay,
need to be responsible for what they
you
can
don't
control.
think so if you don't think there's anything to do with our environments that influence our decisions,
I told
do you
you.
think
I
black people
already
are
said.
just naturally violent or something?
Well,
Because why else would
if you want to talk about black people being naturally violent, you can go back to Africa. You can see that the Congolese people have been at war with each other for thousands of years, and they're still at war with each other, still killing each other, and that's never going to stop. That doesn't mean they
so
have a violent.
you
That
actually
doesn't mean
bit
they
the
have a
bullet.
violent tendency.
So you actually think black people are just naturally violent?
No. What I'm saying is, if you want to go there, you can find any rabbit hole to go down to and prove that assumption easily. I can go through the course of history and find black people that are still at war and still killing each other. As a matter of fact, I can just go to fucking Baltimore, where Baltimore has a murder rate that's almost at the level of El Salvador, Honduras, the murder capital of the world, and say, well, yeah, black people are violent savages. But the fact of the matter is that black people will only do what they want to do because of their own choices. Now, is there a correlation? I said that when I started this. The correlation is the media that black people consume. If we're praising and hailing these rappers and these gang banging type of life, and all you see on TV, all you see in the music that we're listening to is shootings, and then you have no structure where you have no father, no role models in the life. Most of them are brought up into families that are one parent. The mother usually isn't around, particularly in the inner cities, because she has to go off and work. And then you have these young people that have no discipline, they have no structure. They go out and the streets become their guide. They're getting their teaching from the streets. There's where your correlation and your problem is. The correlation and the problem has nothing to do with the system. It has everything to do with the fucking choices that they're making.
You can solve it.
If
You can solve it by giving like childcare to
No, you
people
don't
so that
solve. You don't solve it by giving them childcare. You solve it by giving them discipline.
discipline, like locking them up.
I'm not talking about locking people up.
Why do you
I
think
know what
hip
he's
hop
talking
culture
about.
exists?
I'm talking about
Why do you think hip hop
discipline
culture
in the
exists?
household. You take care of the
like
household
abuse.
before they get out to the streets.
Why do you think
handle the
hip hop
house.
culture exists?
Pop culture exists because people like music. People like what they like.
Yeah,
That's
no.
why it
Why do you think hip hop culture
so
exists?
common.
Like the gangsta culture.
Hip hop culture exists because that was something that was seen as cool. Because
Why
it-
was it seen as
it
cool?
was-
Do you
it
think
was
it has
seen as
something
cool
to do with
because
the
it had
fact that
everything
black
to do-
people were? Do you think it has something to do with the fact that black people were trapped in the ghettos?
Black
Maybe
people
that has
weren't
something to do
trapped
with
in
it.
the ghettos. The
Maybe
majority
because
of
they
the,
were
the
they
majority of black
started out
people's
super
lives-
poor. Maybe because they started out super poor and disadvantaged, they
Damn, man, you
created a
gotta
culture
selling
that
drugs
protects that
and being
disadvantage.
poor, bro. Why
the
you
majority
keep
of black
having us
people
selling
that
drugs
in
and
this
being
country
poor?
before affirmative action and the housing referendums came into place, the majority of black people in this country lived in the rural areas in the country, not in the fucking ghetto. That's number one. So when you are talking
Exactly.
about
Yeah,
the
because
problem with black
they
people
moved
is
to the cities because they were discriminated against.
They
so
didn't
they moved
move
to the
inner
cities to
cities
find
because
work.
they were discriminated against. They moved to the inner cities
after
because you
World
had
War
fucking
II. After
Lyndon
World War
Johnson
II.
put an affirmative action into the inner cities that caused an influx of black people to move to the inner
Not what
cities
happened.
because
After
that's where
World
the
War II,
jobs
all the
were.
white people came back and just demanded the jobs, and so the black people were forced out of their jobs. So they went to the inner cities to get work.
That's not what happened at all. But up until the 1960s, black people were out earning white people at the same time. It was only until the 1960s when affirmative action came into place that black people started going into the inner cities, and then you started seeing this problem. A prime example of that, one of the greatest examples of how that transformation happened was the hit TV show Good Times, which shows exactly what happens when you have a good
What is
male
that?
role model in the house.
James almost. James
What's
James-
good times?
James Amos, James
Exactly.
Evans, John Amos. I mean, that's a prime example of how black people then and down here in the South, because it's still down here like that. Because I can tell you right now, down here, if I were to act up, even at the age that I am, news would get back to the church before I even made it back home.
Are you saying the church raises you?
The church raised me because I had no father. I had my grandmother. My grandmother, she worked all the time to provide for us, so we
Right.
spent a lot of our time at the church, and they took care of everything.
Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have 4 siblings that are biological. I have 3 siblings that are God siblings. And all of my siblings were adopted. Well, I wouldn't say adopted, but they were all sent to foster care. I'm the only one that wasn't sent to foster care. All of my mother's children were sent to foster care, and my grandmother brought them out of foster care and put them into the household. Then we all grew up in different ways. My brother right now, he's in jail. Gotta had a good life. Went to the Marines, but you know what? He decided to go fuck off and do drugs and got kicked out. His poor decisions are the result of where he's at right now. He
So
has
you're
nobody
using a
to
bunch of
blame but
anecdotes
himself.
to prove like a statistical point.
What's the statistical point that you're trying to prove? That black
The
people
statistical
don't
point.
make their own choices? Who's making the choices for black people? Who's the one that's telling black people
There
to
are
do
many
what black
there are
people-
many factors that influence the
I'm not
decisions
talking
of
about
large
factors.
demographics
I'm
of
saying
people.
who tells black people to go do anything?
There are many factors which factor into the decisions of large demographics of
Here
people.
comes the white
If
boogeyman. White
you want to
boogeyman
do,
coming.
if you want to do drugs, is Alex being a white guy, Cal being a white guy. If they tell me to go do drugs, Does that mean I have to go do it because of systemic racism?
On the large scale, if you are very poor, you're more likely to turn to drugs to make money or just to,
Why you keep
just
making
blow
us
off steam.
poor? Why you keep making us
Wait,
poor?
Let me tell you.
Do you
let me
know
tell
that like
this.
most
you
black
do
people
know
are
that
middle
the
class,
majority
right?
the majority of drug abusers in this country are actually really fucking wealthy because they can afford to purchase the damn drugs in the first place.
Yeah, and they're less likely to be arrested for it anyway. Why is that?
They're less likely to be arrested for it because they have money to get out of jail. If you have the money to pay bond and to pay bail, you can get out of it.
Okay,
like
so
OJ.
you just identified criminalizing poverty then. So why do you pretend systemic racism doesn't exist?
Poverty, not at all. I said that there's choices that they made. You said you're talking about poor people are the only ones that are doing fucking
Guys, I feel
drugs.
like this would
I
be
didn't say that.
You guys should have a debate on this. Like, we can set this up as a debate topic if you guys want.
Yes, get his
Yeah,
ass,
because I
DeAndre.
think that
Get
would be a
his
good one.
ass.
I'm
Get
gonna
him.
move on, you guys, and get into some of these questions, and then we'll do closing statements, and then we are gonna call it a night because this is way over time. All right, so from Kevin C to a nihilist, you flippantly talk about how abortion is a solution to bringing someone into a terrible life. How? What is your threshold?
It's kind of a difficult question. I think I'm split between two answers. One is the point at which you're viable outside the womb, and the other is at birth. I'm leaning toward the second one, but I'm not. I haven't made up my mind yet.
Okay. Let's see here. Sorry, I didn't get to them. Question for a nihilist from Base Homeschool Mom. Did you have a bad childhood? Trying to understand how you got so black-pilled. What does black-pilled mean?
It means like hopeless in life.
Oh. You gonna let her talk to you like that?
I mean, no, I don't. I didn't have a bad childhood. I'm just analyzing things like was like the happiness treadmill and the way like people are more upset if they lose something than if they're happy if they gain the same amount. Like if you calculate things enough, you basically realize that life is a net negative. So even if most people enjoy their life and if most people like being alive, so most people like eating chocolate cake, but you can't force someone to eat it.
Okay.
So short answer, you're an atheist. Got it. Okay.
I am a nihilist. I'm a Satanist. Yeah.
He's a Satanist. So from crazy old to a nihilist, ask him if he thinks we just kill the people from Central America trying to cross the border since their life is shit. Should they have been aborted instead?
Maybe it would have been better if they had been aborted before they, started being a person. But at this point, now that they're in this shitty life, presumably they wish to continue being in this shitty life, or else they'd kill themselves. So we don't need to do it for them.
All right. So from Don Taylor to DeAndre, he's asking if you have kids.
My personal life is of
not you. He ain't talking to you,
bro.
It's not always about you, brother.
I'm self-centered.
Go ahead, DeAndre.
No, I do not have kids. I have nieces and nephews, but I'm not planning on having children anytime soon. I still think I'm too young for kids.
How old are you?
26.
Okay. All right. Let's see what else we got here. No, that's not a question. All right. So from Lizer Johnson, why is this a Satanist? Some guy so pressed to make this man feel like whites are responsible for all his problems.
When did I say whites were responsible for problems? I ain't got anything against white people. I'm talking about society as a whole.
Well, white society.
It's society as a whole. I mean, it includes white people, and then white people have been making the decisions, but there's nothing inherently wrong about white people.
Well, American society was pretty much built almost entirely by whites. So when you say systemic racism, it is kind of a blood libel against whites.
But not because they're white. I mean, you didn't cause systemic racism just because you are white, right? It's people who happen to be white.
Okay. That's still kind of the same thing, but all right.
Again, I have nothing against white people.
You just hate everything that they've built, though.
I only hate the racist things some white people have done.
I could list a lot of racist things that every people of every color has done, but not just white people can be racist.
Right.
Oh yeah. Many people of many colors can be racist.
Okay. I mean, I think it all stems from different areas, but that's another topic. Okay, so from Kevin to Annihilus, what factors tell you what to do? What controls you? What part of society makes you do what you do without any agency?
Well, philosophically, I'm a determinist, but I don't think that's the main part of the question, really. It's just there's a lot of factors that just that influence your decision, especially on a larger scale. So I might think I, on a micro scale, have control over my actions, but on a large scale, you'll figure out that people who are poor commit more crimes. There's a line of causation there. It's not super hard to figure out.
Line of correlation, you mean? But go on.
Okay, so from Crazy Hole as a follow-up, Annihilus, if you see that someone has a shitty life, wouldn't it be better to just kill them, even if it's after birth? Bad Crazy
It's
Hole.
the same question again. If they really hate their own life, they have the ability to kill themselves now. So I don't need to do it for them.
Okay. I know that I saw some question from Big Papa Fascist to Alex. He asked, when does life begin? I missed it, but it was up
I remember
there.
him and I had this question, and I kind of got a little flustered throughout the debate. So I actually did say that life actually does begin within the first 6 to 8 weeks, because initially I remember that question being asked me, and I said when the baby is born, but after doing some extensive research on it, I'm a firm believer that life truly does begin after the first 6 to 8 weeks. Essentially, that's when everything starts to kind of take shape, because up until that point, anything can happen then. But of course, at the same time, after 6 to 8 weeks, that life can go away due to a miscarriage and whatnot. So I remember he had asked me that question, and I was a little confused, but you know what? It's okay. So.
Wait, just a very, very quick follow-up, yes or no answer. Since if according to you, it's not a person up until 6 to 8 weeks. If a woman has a miscarriage beforehand, is her grief valid?
Of course it is.
Okay. So you are admitting that it is a person to grieve over, so that's interesting.
They were planning to keep that.
Can I just do a little quick follow-up to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
If a woman has a miscarriage, though, that means it was not intentional. So therefore, she's going to have some kind of grief into that regard. Wouldn't you say?
So it's only a person if you intend to?
No, that's not what I asked.
Not if you don't intend to kill it?
I asked you a very simple question, though. It was not intentional. Therefore, if she was intending to carry the baby, if she has a miscarriage, you can understand why she would have that kind of grief, right?
I mean, but it's still a person. She's still grieving over a baby.
That's my entire
baby that wasn't born yet.
I mean,
still a baby.
I grieved over my teddy bear getting destroyed.
I knew it.
Okay, so
yeah, so the grief is still valid even if it was never alive to begin with.
Yeah, there's an innate difference between losing a toy and losing a child.
For fuck's sake, people grieved over the death of Brian on Family Guy. So what is your point? So
I don't think anybody grieved. Everyone hated that episode. I don't think anybody grieved
kidding me?
on that.
People were freaking the fuck out.
I was looking forward to Brian dying and staying dead.
Yeah, everyone hates Brian. It's literally Seth MacFarlane's self-insert character.
People are very happy about it. That's funny.
But people were freaking the fuck out. People actually made entire oh my god, why the fuck did you kill Brian off? People were grieving over that shit. So.
And Brian was the least funny guy on the show. They should have killed him off and gave Meg a spotlight.
Oh my god, everybody, you heard it. DeAndre wants dogs killed, so okay, so from Kevin, does Alex truly believe that blacks in poor areas have no choice but to eat fast food, no other option?
So here's the reason why I say that, okay? I just use that as an example, okay? A while back, I actually looked into this, and there was actually a study done that, with some minorities there in predominantly lower income areas, the fast food choices are very common. Meanwhile, a lot of the healthy food choices are very slim. As a matter of fact, especially with the hospital choices, the healthcare centers and whatnot are very slim pickings right there. And I'm not trying to say that, black people don't have the option, because this happens all around. If you go into places into Detroit, on Jefferson Street, in one area, you're going to see gas stations, you're going to see pawn shops, you're going to see low-income areas, you're going to see burnt-out neighborhoods and whatnot, and then you're going to see fast food restaurants everywhere, and in a blink of an eye, you're going to be in Grosse Pointe. Now, it's all about, the kind of area that you're in, really. Now, if you're in a low income area right there, which unfortunately black people happen to be, and not just black people, but Hispanic or other white people happen to be in these communities as well. When you see low income neighborhoods, you're going to see you're going to see poor choices for food. You're going to see grocery stores have lower quality food, but that just kind of like how sometimes the free market works. Really, you're going to see some situations where the food might be of lower quality because of like a closer expiration date, or it's because it's much closer to the expiration date. It's going to get shipped to those locations right there. The hospitals are going to be of lower quality because some doctors are just going to pick the hospital to go to so that way they can have that occupation right there, and they're not going to get all the same kind of care. There's machines might not necessarily be up to date as well. This is a very common thing, especially in low income neighborhoods. Now, I'm not saying that it's just because of black people. I'm just saying that black people happen to end up in this area. But again, black people are not the only victims in this. White people are the victims in this. Hispanic people are the victims in this. People are victims because these are impoverished neighborhoods right here. And in impoverished neighborhoods, you are going to see fast food restaurants be common in that area.
All right, I'm getting to some of these other questions. All right, so from listening podcasts, what is the value of life in Satanism to a nihilist?
Boy,
It's pretty valuable. I mean, if by life you mean
the
like
11
a
rules of
person.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not actually a Satanist. So you know.
Allegedly.
oh,
Yeah, allegedly. Like you'll never know for sure.
Yeah. All right, from Warren to a nihilist.
Kevin just called me a racist, and is hilarious that he would actually say that when I said nothing of the sort. So nice try, Kevin, but you failed.
Yeah, Alex is not a racist.
Okay, so from Warren Gilman for a nihilist, isn't a successful life determined by the degree of which you embrace a shitty life with the goal of improving it?
I think a successful life is one where you can be happy.
Okay. All right, from Crazy Hole to the panel, what would it be better to sterilize people than abort babies after a bad decision was made? Let's go to Kyle first.
Would it be better to sterilize a person?
Mm-hmm.
It would probably depend. Like if you're a rapist, maybe. But
Okay.
like from something beyond that, I really don't know. I don't really think that's relevant to the abortion question.
Okay, and you guys, when we do this, let's do like a 30-second answer. So let's go to DeAndre now.
No, not at all. I think that would be akin to what happened back in the day in North Africa when they were selling their slaves over there. They would forcefully castrate them, make them eunuchs, so that they wouldn't have sex. I think that would be almost borderline the same thing. So no, leave that. It's back up to personal choice, personal responsibility for what they do in the bedroom.
All right, Alex.
I'm a firm believer that there should be more talk of sex education. For example, promoting the concept of why it's important for you to practice safe sex, especially because this is more common. The concept of abstinence, while it's 100% effective, is nonsense nowadays because the average age of which a child can possess a phone is 11, which makes them more susceptible to seeing things like pornography, is going to turn their mind to want to take part in things like this, which is why the parents need to become more involved. But I think sterilization is wrong. I don't think you should force people to become sterilized in that regard. I think that it just needs to be promoted as listen, if you're going to do something like this, take the morning after pill, here's some condoms, do this. But it's just
I think that's the one thing we've agreed on all this time.
Absolutely.
All right, a nihilist.
Okay, so I don't believe that giving life to somebody is a fundamental right. I think it's immoral to force life upon other people, as I have said many times. So I don't think sterilization is necessarily a violation of human rights, but it tends to go in that sort of territory. Like in the past, we've used it to basically genocide a lot of people. So obviously, you'd have to approach it with extreme caution. If we're talking about eugenics or something like that, I think we should start slow, probably with universal DNA checks and genetic tests to make sure that people don't have severe genetic diseases, and just inform everyone and then let them make the decision on their own. But I mean, I'm not fundamentally opposed to the idea.
And just
Okay.
kill everybody. Just
Alright,
end
so
the human population right
This is
there.
gonna be the last question, then we're gonna go into closing and we're gonna shut it down. All right. So for all participants, who takes credit for building America? From Elizur Johnson. So Annihilus, why don't you go first? We'll go backwards.
The workers who create all of the economic value create America, and they sustain it, and the capitalists, the capital owners, do nothing.
Okay, Alex.
Everybody has contributed equally. Some people more so than others. Like, for example, the Chinese helped build the railroads. The black people actually helped build the infrastructure throughout the society. There was white people that actually helped build it as well. There was the capitalists that actually did help make our country to where it is. I feel like everybody should take some credit, but I think we need to properly represent those who helped build this country and make sure that they are actually given the due credit. Because I think we tend to do that far too often, saying, well, we're the only ones that built this country, when everybody had some sort of a measure to make this country the way it is today, honestly.
Okay, thank you. DeAndre?
In simple terms, I would say the ones that built the country are the entrepreneurs. They're the ones that create the businesses that allow the country to continue to thrive. They're the ones that employ the workers. They get the workers out to go about where they're going and help our infrastructure go around. They developed all the intellectual property that we use today that makes our life as convenient and as luxury filled as it is. And considering that America is not the expectation of life, it is the exception, because we have done things so right here that we are the exception to the world. I mean, the rest of the majority of the existence of the world is impoverished, but America has thrived because of entrepreneurs and the ideas, particularly people like the Carnegies with the idea of philanthropy and bringing that up into other communities.
All right, thank you. Kyle? Still there,
What?
Kyle?
Yep, it's up. Yeah.
Yeah,
So the people who deserve credit for building America are Americans.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna do just final thoughts, under a minute, you guys. Okay, and then we're gonna shut it down. So, DeAndre, why don't you go first?
Well, I guess my final thoughts would be, in this discussion about the flipping of states and abortions rights, all of the things like this, I think it's important to follow the record. More importantly, I think it's important for people to actually vote based upon their own actual beliefs and not vote based on party. I mean, I think that's the biggest problem. Start having more discussions about getting outside of the box and outside of the bubble of just following in line with what everybody else in your aisle of politics links to. And friend of mine told me to give him a shout out, so I'll shout out to my good friend the Owl Man. Kane told me to tell you he's not a racist, Brittany.
He's been messaging me a few times during this. Hi, Kane. Well, I wonder which one is it. Kane, which one are you on here? Everybody has a different YouTube names, but all right.
Names to keep up with.
Yeah. All right. So, Alex, final thoughts.
So I wanted to just take the time to thank everybody that came on here, because I think this is a good panel. Everybody had a chance to kind of give their points of view on here. We may not agree, but you know what? This is a good place to come on here and express your points of view. Even if we don't agree, we can still find some sort of common ground right here. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for us to understand is, like, you have to do your own research. You can't just look at one point. You just can't look at one article and say, this is truth right here. Try to find out what the source of that is, who wrote that article, find out their political bias from there, and then move on to another source right there. Because I have a feeling that for some reason, everybody will just see a source and just settle on that, like, right off the bat. Whether it's abortion, whether the party switched, and whether, like, the situation in Israel. You have to be willing to see other points of view, see other articles, take the time to actually have your own point of view challenged, just to see if there's any real consistency in that regard, because that's the best way for you to learn right there. This is what makes you smarter and makes you more well educated about what's going on in the world right there. But once again, thanks for Politically Provoked for having me on tonight. I always enjoy coming on here.
Thank you. Annihilus.
Okay, so just recapping some of the things. We moved on from Israel. I don't even remember it super well, but I mean, my position is basically Hamas bad, Israel worse. The parties switching, in some ways they did, and in some ways they didn't. The conservatives switched from being the Democrats to the Republicans today, obviously, and of course geographically it did switch eventually over time. It's not super important, more when you consider just what the parties are at today and which party best represents you today. That's probably more important. And I'd be looking forward to an abortion debate or a racism debate in the future if anybody's up for it.
We're gonna get you a debate with DeAndre. That's gonna have to happen for sure because you guys definitely have to do that. Kyle, I know you weren't here for most of it, but if you have anything you wanted to say before we shut this down.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on halfway through it. I was playing Arkham City on my stream and I got bored collecting Riddler trophies, so I came on here. So thanks for having me on.
Cool. So we'll be having Kyle will be on here next week. It's gonna be we're gonna have a pretty good panel next week actually. We're going to be talking about the difference between the Capitol Hill riots versus the summer riots. So that should be a interesting topic. And Todd, you got anything you want to say before we shut this down?
Yes, I gave you the numbers, people. So the science is settled. I don't rock the Crips or the Bloods. Republicans ain't conservative enough for me, but I gave you the numbers, and numbers don't lie. The science is settled. Thank you, everyone, for coming on. I do appreciate it. Back to you, Britt. I'm out.
Yeah. Thank you guys all for coming on. Tomorrow night we have Mrs. Papa Fascist. She's going to be doing the debate with Stardust, and they will be debating feminism and family values.
Stardust. I forgot to kill myself.
Wait, you pipe down. You're done. So they will be debating. I think it's at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then Sunday, Big Papa Fascist will be debating at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. They will be debating tanking communism with a full-on communist. They were fighting last night on Discord, and that was hilarious. So it's going to be good. Other than that, we'll see you guys tomorrow night, and good luck. Goodbye, guys.